Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Lynn. It is May 15th, 2021, and we are broadcasting to you live today from Mormon Story Studios in Holiday, Utah. And I'm super excited for today's interview. Today, we're interviewing someone who has a larger social media following than I do, which isn't saying a lot. But it's someone who has done really cool things. His name is Drew Manning. Hey, Drew, welcome to Mormon Stories Podcast.
John, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
For those of you who don't know, Drew Manning is known throughout the country, maybe even world, as the founder of Fit2Fat2Fit. And we're going to talk about what that is in just a minute. But before we do, I'm just going to welcome Kara Burrell. Hey, Kara.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So for those who don't know Kara Burrell, Kara is a TikTok sensation. She goes by...
Stop. Nope.
What's that?
Cancel this podcast. You've already said.
TikTok guru, right?
Kara goes by Nuance Ho on TikTok. She does an amazing job. Check her out. But she is joining us today as a producer. She's just helping with the techie stuff behind the scenes, and maybe she'll even jump in to correct us or to comment here and there with wit and wisdom. But Kara, it's good to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything you wanna say?
Oh, did I want to say? I'm going to save all of my good things to say for later. But yeah,
Okay.
I'm just happy to be here. It's going to be awesome.
Well, it's good to have you.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining. Okay, so we're excited for today's interview. It's going to be about 2.5 hours. It's not going to be an epic multi-hour thing just because Drew's a busy man and we're just grateful for the time that he's been willing to give us. But aside from being the founder of Fit2Fat2Fit, Drew Manning was also raised Mormon and he's got his own Mormon story. And I just want to give a disclaimer that Drew's audience is going to be tuning in. Many of them, probably most of them, have no idea what Mormons are. And as I understand it, Drew's never really talked about his Mormonism much to his audience. And so we will be doing our best to define terms to the broader audience. So those of you who have been Mormon for a long time, who have been listeners for a long time, please be patient. We want the rest of the world to understand what we're talking about. So without any further ado, Drew, you've been on like major television networks and shows. Can you give yourself a proper introduction? Because you deserve a better one than what I gave you.
That's okay. Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Drew Manning. I have a brand called Fit2Fat2Fit, which, you can go and Google it, what that is. Basically, in a nutshell, I did this crazy experiment as a personal trainer and someone who's never been overweight. I intentionally gained about 75 pounds and documented that journey of gaining weight on my social media, and the story kind of went viral, online. I went on TV shows like Jay Leno, Dr. Oz, Good Morning America, The View, Dr. Drew, a bunch of other ones. And this crazy experiment kind of caught on because here I was, someone who had never been overweight, ripped, shredded like most personal trainers are. And I wanted to better understand what it was like to be overweight so that I could relate to my clients. And so I did this Fit2Fat2Fit experiment. It kind of went viral, went on a bunch of TV shows. I wrote a book. The book became a New York Times bestseller. The book eventually got turned into its own TV show called Fit2Fat2Fit, where then we put other trainers through that process so that they could become more empathetic and have a better understanding on the mental and emotional side of transformation. And so that aired on A&E. We had 2 seasons of that TV show. That's kind of, my claim to fame, I guess you can say, or how I came to be. And most people know me as the Fit2Fat2Fit guy.
And the book is called
Fit2Fat2Fit.
Okay. And I guess we should give a shout out to Dre Nord from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake episode. Dre's a dear friend, Dre of Gay and Dre. But Dre's the one, I guess you and Dre are friends, and she's the one who recommended I interviewed you.
Yeah, we go to the gym together. I commented on her episode, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you should go on John's podcast." I'm like, "I don't know him," but I was like, "If you want to introduce us, sure." So, and here we are.
Yeah. Well, fun. Well, thanks for coming on. We're so honored to have you. And let's just begin. So let's start with your Mormon story. Tell us how it all began for you.
Yeah, this is awesome because most of my interviews that I do start with Fit2Fat2Fit. So it's kind of a breath of fresh air to go back and talk about the real me, So I grew up in Southern California in a family of 11 brothers and sisters. And I guess before I even go into this, can I just say this? I just want to make sure that people watching this understand that my Mormon story of where I am today is coming from a place of healing. I've done a lot of work on myself, personal development, self-help type of work, to get to a place where I'm coming from a place of healing. I don't hold on to resentment. I don't hold on to blame. I don't hold on to anger. And so as you hear me talk about my Mormon story, whether it's about my family or the culture I grew up in, or, leaders in the church, I want to make sure people understand that the reason I'm willing to do this interview is because I'm not here to cast stones. I'm not here to stick it to the man and try and bring down any kind of organization or say, hey, I was wronged and I'm mad at these people. It truly is coming from a place of healing. And my hope is to give people that are listening to this courage and hope that no matter how angry you are or how justified you are in holding on to resentment as the victim, there is hope on the other side, and you can get to these places of being at peace finally, and coming from a place of healing. So, with that being said, thank you for letting me talk about that. Because for me, that's really important.
And believers are sensitive too. They're going to say, "Oh, you came on Mormon Stories. Maybe you hate the church. Or you're trying to tear the church down." And I think literally no one, maybe one person I've ever interviewed has that goal, right?
Yeah. So
and that's not yours, right?
No, that's not my goal. Yeah. That's not who I am. That's not what my brand is about. That's so I grew up in a family of 11 brothers and sisters. My parents, bless them. I don't know why they decided to have 11 kids, but they did. And I was number 7, 8 boys, 3 girls. And my perception of the culture I grew up in, being Mormon, being raised in a kind of a tough love environment, and playing football and wrestling, doing those sports, was that I was never good enough. And like I said, that's my perception based off of the culture that I was raised in my family, the culture of the church for me, and the culture of sports was beat yourself up, discipline yourself more because you're not good enough. And by disciplining yourself and beating yourself up is how you become better and become more perfect. And the scriptures kind of led me to that conclusion as well. It's like, okay, I need to punish myself. I need to suffer so that I can become perfect, right? That was kind of the goal.
So what types of Mormons were your parents, and what type of Mormon family were you in?
Very strict. We grew up very strict Mormons. My parents, I think their parents were converts, so they grew up in the church as kids. And they did it. We woke up at 5 a.m. for scripture study as kids, and we would have to read one verse, each kid. And, early morning seminary, family home evening every Monday night. We didn't miss church for anything. We were shamed or guilted if we didn't make it to church on time, or if we missed church, it was a big deal, So very strict upbringing. And like I said, that kind of played into the sports culture I grew up in as well, where, hey, discipline, you missed the tackle, here's your punishment. If you sin, here's your punishment. And so that kind of mentality was how I grew up as a kid, where I'm like, okay, if I sin, if I mess up in life, there's going to be some type of punishment. Like either, I remember my dad, I got an A- on something. He's like, why didn't you get an A+? And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like that, it was that kind of upbringing that had me to, kind of push me to discipline myself and want to become better, because I felt like I was never good enough. Does that make sense?
What was his career? Did you already tell us this?
No, my dad was a software engineer.
Okay.
And my dad is part Hawaiian, so he grew up in Hawaii, and that's the thing, is like I look back at my parents and I don't blame them, because
of course
they did the best they could.
Of course.
They're product of their environments. And so that was the tough love mentality worked for them, I guess. And that's kind of what was passed on down to me.
Hawaiian Mormons are kind of proud to be Hawaiian Mormons, right? Yeah.
The Polynesian community, I think a lot of them gravitate towards the Mormon religion just because of the family, the community, ohana, the mana they feel in these, whether it's at church. And so, but there was this discipline side of it too, where it's very strict. Either you're A+ or you're a failure, right? That's the upbringing that I had. So, as a kid, I definitely beat myself up a lot. I didn't think I was good enough. And I was never once told, hey, good job. Hey, you did great. It was like, hey, you need to do this. Hey, you messed up. during the game. You missed a tackle. You did this. You need to get an A+. You need to be perfect, right? That was my perception of how I was raised.
Was your mom a stay-at-home mom?
Stay-at-home mom. Yep.
Okay.
Trying to take care of 11 kids.
11 kids.
Yeah.
Did you say where you grew up as well?
San Diego.
San Diego.
Until I was about 13. And then we moved to Virginia.
Oh.
Yeah. East Coast. So West Coast, East Coast. And, there was a different shift from the West Coast to the East Coast of growing up in the culture on the East Coast versus the West Coast. And, we were true blue Mormon family. Like I said, we did all the hardcore stuff,
And in birth order, you already told us, but you were
7.
You're 7. Okay. So right kind of mid, a little late mid. Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you remember primary and kind of Cub Scout years? Anything interesting happened to you during those times?
Not
as
really.
As a Mormon kid?
Nothing I wouldn't say too interesting, other than the fact that we were taught to kind of just like, don't rock the boat, don't ask questions, fall in line, do what you're told to do, and just like, that's the way we were raised. So going to church was go to church, don't rock the boat, don't ask questions, don't be disobedient, like pay attention, be reverent. All these things. And so for us, it was kind of like, okay, I don't want to get in trouble, so I'm just going to do what my parents tell me to do. So
did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy church as a kid? As a Cub Scout?
I don't know if any kids truly enjoy it, to be honest with you. Looking back on it, it was something we were forced to do. We were forced to do. Like we were forced to go. And whether we liked it or not, we had to go. And I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. But it was something we did.
Yeah. Okay.
And, there was treats. So maybe as a kid, I liked the treats or I liked certain aspects of it. But I mean, let's be honest, it was kind of boring.
Yeah.
And it is boring.
Yeah.
Especially for kids.
So once you started moving into your teen years, for most Mormon kids, there's early morning seminary where you go to church. Outside of Utah, you go at 6 a.m., maybe 6 to 7 a.m., get religious instruction every morning of your high school day. Did you go to early morning seminary? And if so, what was that like for you?
I did out in Virginia. I went to early morning seminary, and as a teenage kid, waking up that early in the morning is hell. Like that was so hard, but we would do scripture study, and then I would make it to early morning seminary.
Wow. And
I despised it because I was so tired. And I went through this phase. Once I got good at sports, I kind of went through this. And I went through, puberty, this hormonal change where I was like, I'm too good for this stuff. I'm too, like, Boy Scouts, that's embarrassing. Like, I would get made fun of if I went to football practice with my Boy Scout shirt on. Like, I was kind of ashamed of being Mormon, to be honest with you, because it was uncool.
What sports were you doing?
Football and wrestling.
Okay.
So, like, being a
starting in middle school, like really early?
Yeah, even elementary school.
Okay.
I started, like, really young.
What position were you playing?
At Pop Warner level, any position, everyone's the same size. So I played offensive tackle, played tight end, played linebacker or safety, like all different positions.
Okay. And wrestling. That's a real sport, man.
That's a hard
sport. Yeah.
And that's that kind of mentality too carried over into religion, where I'm like, oh, this is perfect because you are disciplined to the point where you're like, okay, to become better, you have to discipline yourself more, beat yourself up more to make it to the next level. And that's kind of the mentality I grew up with.
Okay. So are you saying you didn't really get into seminary and like it?
No, I did. I had to go. I had to go. I didn't like it. Funny story. My seminary teacher, she had a record of never failing a student in all of her years of teaching seminary. So she would never fail a student. So as long as I showed up, she passed me. So I showed up. I showed up and was too cool to like participate. So I just put my head down and, I wasn't the best kid back then, my sophomore, junior, senior years, because football and wrestling was my life.
Okay.
Academics was like, I was like a typical jock.
Okay.
I didn't realize people could fail seminary.
I don't know, but she gave me
hard.
a D.
You have to really work hard.
She gave me like a D.
What happens if you fail? Go to hell? Like what?
You don't pass with a certificate, maybe? I don't know.
Oh, wow. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what, but she kind of was proud about every student passes. And so I showed up, me and my friend, he picked me up. We were like the wrestling guys, we were the jock guys. And I just put my head down for seminary because you're so tired. Like, how are you going to really absorb that stuff and be like, oh yeah, this can make me a better person? I don't know how.
Yeah, that definitely makes a unique Mormon upbringing from all of your other sports friends where people are what they're probably sleeping in, or they're getting better gains than you are because you're out at 5 a.m. sleeping.
I was like super sleep deprived. So it was, it definitely was hard to navigate that. But I passed seminary. I guess we can say I passed seminary.
Did you feel like you had like spiritual inclinations to
spiritual experiences?
Yeah, like spiritual experiences, like a connection with God growing up, or is it more like performative, something that you felt like you just?
I think the first time I kind of felt, quote unquote, the spirit, if you can see my air quotes here, was when I went to the San Diego Temple dedication. I was like 12 or something, and we sang the Spirit of God like in the temple, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, this is the best experience of my life. I got the tingles, and I'm like, okay, maybe that was the Spirit. That's what I was taught. And so that was like the first time I felt the Spirit. But then other than that, I didn't feel it 90% of the time. It was just like going through the motions, just like most kids, you're going through the motions. You're not really, I don't know. I really didn't feel connected to it. I didn't even learn about my religion until probably my mission. I didn't put in any effort to become a better Mormon until my mission.
You were just kind of doing it because you were forced to.
Exactly. Yep. And that's kind
so
of
that spiritual experience when it happened. You said it was during a temple dedication.
San Diego Temple.
What did that mean to you when that happened? So tell us that experience.
Yeah. So when I was 12 years old, like by the way, the San Diego Temple is probably one of like the most beautiful temples in my opinion, and it was I got to go to it because we were living out there, and I was there with my whole family, and we were singing the Spirit of God, and it was like hundreds of people in this congregation, and the Spirit of God is like a popular hymn in the Mormon church, and we were all singing it, and it felt cool. Like it felt like those tingles. It felt like really positive, powerful experience. And I was 12, so I was too young to really maybe understand like, oh, this is the Spirit testifying that the church is true. It was more so, this is a positive experience. I felt good in the temple, and I still remember that to this day.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so when it happened, did you encode it as the church is true?
No, not at the time.
Okay.
I think later on I looked back like, oh yeah, I started to feel the Spirit, as a preteen.
So one of the things that I ask everyone about is just kind of the shame cycle, because I've started to realize that something that's kind of baked into the key secret recipe of Mormonism is, unfortunately, and I don't think this is intentional, it's getting kids to feel like there's something wrong with them, like they're broken or defective.
Yeah.
And if you can get kids to feel that way, then they feel like they need the church, they need Christ, they need the atonement, they need their bishop, they need the sacrament to make them whole. And so I ask everyone the same question. Did you experience kind of that shame cycle, that shame spiral as a Mormon teen? And if so, what are you able to tell us about that?
Yeah, 100%. So I have my own podcast, and on my episode 100, which is by far my most downloaded podcast, I kind of open up and talk about the guilt and shame cycle that started from like probably preteen, teenage years as a normal teenage kid, but with the pressure of the perfectionism of the church, you go through a lot of self-hate. And like I said, I grew up with that mentality of I'm not good enough and I need to discipline myself even more to become more perfect. And then add on hormonal changes, puberty, access to pornography, because in the Mormon church, pornography is taught as a very, very serious sin. So, but as a normal teenage boy, your hormones are raging. And in the 90s, like friends had magazines, and it was like the most exciting thing for me. But I remember even like Gordon B. Hinckley in one of his priesthood sessions was saying, I remember him saying, pornography is exciting, but it's deadly, it's dangerous. And I'm like, that kind of solidified in my brain where it's like, it's so exciting because it's this forbidden fruit. It's this thing that I know is bad to look at, but it makes me want it or desire it more.
Especially when they're talking about it all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, when they're talking about it all the time, and the pressure you have on yourself to not look or not be excited by it, it's almost impossible, right? I would say it's almost impossible. Not for everyone, but for most kids that have access to that. And so, yeah, I'm totally fine, open talking about pornography as a teenage kid, guilt, shame, self-hate, beating yourself up. That was an endless cycle for me personally, was the pornography, the forbidden fruit syndrome that I, talk to people about of like, hey, because it's this forbidden fruit, kind of makes you desire it more, right? It's not normalized. I can't talk to my parents. I can't go talk to my church leaders about it because I'll feel judged and I'll feel dirty and I'll feel ashamed. So I'm just going to keep it inside because, going to a church leader in the Mormon church is difficult because you go to them with your sins and say, hey, I'm looking at pornography. And they say, okay, here is your punishment. And they don't say the word punishment. You go through the repentance process. But as a kid, you process what they're telling you as a punishment because every Sunday when they serve sacrament, they pass around bread and water. And it's drilled in your head. You can only partake of the bread and water, the sacrament, if you're worthy. And if you're not worthy and you partake of it, it's even a more serious sin, right? That is drilled in our head as kids in the Mormon church. And they pass around the bread and water so that everyone can see who partakes of it, right? The leaders are up there in the front, the bishop and his
counselors.
I almost said disciples. Yeah. Like almost watching you, like who's taking it, who's not. And as a teenage kid, it's so, what's the word? Dehumanizing. To have this bread and water passed around. You were told by your bishop, because you looked at pornography or because you masturbated, you can't partake of it. And your family's right there. Your friends are right there. People you know are like maybe watching. That kind of pressure as a teenage kid is really hard to grab it and not take it and hope no one notices. But the shame, the guilt you feel because you can't partake of it is really hard as a kid. And looking at pornography, masturbation is a serious sin in the Mormon church, and you're not able to take the bread and water for X amount of weeks. So that's what I mean by, hey, going to your church leader and getting a punishment is very similar to in the sports world. If you mess up, there's a punishment. If you mess up at home, if you are disobedient, there's going to be a punishment. We were punished as kids all the time. And this was just another thing that stuck in my head of, here's something I messed up on, and here's my punishment. And this is how I get better, is by punishing myself more and more and more to eventually become perfect. And that kind of cycle is what I'm trying to help people break.
How did you punish yourself at the time?
Self-hate, self-sabotage, doing stupid things, trying to find escapes, trying to fit in with other people, giving into peer pressure to be liked. All kinds of ways I think teenage kids navigate that world of wanting to be loved, accepted, understood, appreciated. They go through this self-sabotage of like, I'll just be a horrible person as long as someone likes me. Maybe it's these bad kids that smoke weed, or maybe it's these kids that drink. Maybe they'll accept me, and because you're not good enough to partake of the sacrament at church, or pass the interview,
So if the Mormon church says don't drink, don't do drugs, don't have sex, be nice to people, be honest.
Yeah.
Then if you feel like you're unworthy, if you feel like you're broken, then sometimes you can just say, well, I better act the part because I'm broken. And so you might act out in some of those ways as a way to self-sabotage because you feel like you're just broken and unworthy.
You feel like you're a failure already. So why not do failure-like things? You're the thing that's drilled into Mormon kids' heads is that sexual sin is a sin next to murder. And this is something maybe people outside of the church don't understand, is the seriousness of that's drilled into teenage kids. No masturbation, no pornography, no sex before marriage. And if you do, your sin is up there with murder. Yeah. And so as a kid processing that,
people don't understand that the stakes are that high.
The stakes are that high.
It is next to murder. We're not making that up, right?
Yeah, that's not hearsay. That is the truth. Yeah. It's in the scriptures, in the Book of Mormon, I believe. I don't remember where because I don't have them memorized anymore. But yeah, it's in the scriptures.
But you're 15 thinking that you're next to a murderer. Is that exaggerating?
No, that's not exaggerating.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're taught. And so that's the kind of self-hate that I had. I'm like, you're a failure. So what I decided to do, my self-preservation mechanism I used was to just hide it. Mm-hmm. I was like, this is so hard for me to go to my bishop every time I mess up, which as a teenage kid, I mean, come on, you're going to mess up based on those
weekly,
rules.
Daily, monthly, somewhere in there.
It's so humiliating and demoralizing to have a punishment attached to it. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. I'm going to suppress those emotions of self-hate and lust and desire for sexual things and just pretend they don't exist. I'm not going to talk to my parents. I'm not going to talk to my church leaders, and I'm just going to keep it in.
And so you also learn to hide,
Yes.
to be inauthentic,
Lie.
and you learn to lie. And those are things that in theory a religion shouldn't. And it's, again, we're not saying that the Mormon church is like, let's make everyone liars. Like that's not how it works. They want people to be good. This is just how they do it. But unfortunately, how it ends up is that it makes people learn to hide, suppress, and lie.
Yeah.
And feel like they're worthless.
Yeah. You don't feel it's a safe environment to confess and talk about those things because you're broken down. Like it's like you're a sinner. You've done this horrible thing. You know, there's not a lot of hope. Like, hey, you're still a good kid. You're still a good person. So you don't feel safe. Like going to my parents, I didn't feel safe going to them because I knew that they wouldn't understand.
Right.
And I would just feel judged. And going to my leaders in the church was like, okay, here's your punishment. And to be, publicly humiliated by not being able to take the bread and water, for me, that was my perception of like, I don't want to go through that. So I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. So I learned from a very young age to lie, suppress those emotions. And if it did happen, it was just like, okay, pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah. So how did this all play out in high school? So did you do football and wrestling in high school?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
college.
And in college.
Yeah.
So how did your high school end up?
Yeah, I kind of had my rebellious phase. My mom always reminds me my senior year was like my hardest year because I didn't care about school. I didn't care about grades. I was like, good grades? Oh, you get made fun of, So I kind of, like I said, I gave into peer pressure to fit in with certain people, certain crowds. And the crowd that I decided to fit in with was mostly jocks, and they didn't care about school. So I, skip class. I would, go, party with friends and hide it from my parents, hide it from everyone, because I didn't want them to know about this side of me. And I just pretended that side of me didn't exist. I would go to church on Sunday and, just pretend like on the outside, I was this perfect kid who had it all put together. But on the inside, I was this hurt little boy that was just confused, scared, wanted to be loved, wanted to make people proud. And, I didn't, I never felt worthy or good enough no matter what I did. So I just was like, well, I'm going to be by people that make me feel good about who I am, no matter what we're doing. If we're drinking, doing stupid stuff, and I went through my rebellious phase, I think my junior and senior year of high school.
So I can see this is bringing up some sensitive emotions for you. And I'm wondering if you're channeling that kid and kind of what that kid was feeling. That must've been, I can tell that was really hard.
Yes. And I think the reason that's hard for me is because, doing all this inner work on myself, I've learned that I think within all of us is this inner child that probably didn't receive the love that they needed. And I definitely did not receive that. And like I said, I don't blame my parents because they didn't know any better. Mm-mm. But I think a lot of the issues that I had growing up with my perception of Mormonism, my perception of who I was because I didn't feel like I got love. Like even to this day, my dad's never said, I love you. He's never said, I'm proud of you. And I think as a kid, you don't know how to process that. If you never hear that you're loved or you're lovable or you're worthy from your own parents, how can you possibly believe that you are? And so for me, I think a lot of people, adults, who struggle in life and who maybe are holding on to resentment and hate, self-hate, a lot of it has to do with this inner child that's been hurt and wounded, and they haven't given themselves that love yet. And for me, I still, and we'll talk about this in an ayahuasca experience that came up for me, but we'll talk about the inner child.
What did that child need at the time?
Like I said, just a reaffirmation that I'm good enough, that I'm worthy, that I'm lovable, despite all these mistakes, despite all these quote unquote sins that I had. I didn't feel like I received that love from anyone. So I didn't give myself that love. I was like, no, just toughen up, be a man. You don't need love, And I think, part of our culture as men is to man up.
It's kind of a toxic masculinity, right? Yeah,
definitely. It can be for sure, especially with the sports world that I grew up with. And I thought that was the way to becoming perfect, was just to, like I said, discipline, beat yourself up, man up, and don't talk about emotions. Yeah. And I'll talk later eventually about how that broke me.
Anything else about your Mormon experience in high school prior to like college and mission?
That's a good question. I had good leaders, like young men leaders that really, like there was parts of like the young men programs that I did enjoy, like going camping, being part of this community with other youth in my high school. And there were positive things for sure. I'm not saying all this is negative. There were definitely some positive aspects to growing up Mormon, growing up in the church, community. And I think, the Boy Scouts, for example, like I enjoyed camping as a kid, I enjoyed those kinds of things.
By the time you graduated from high school, how would you describe your testimony, your Mormon testimony?
It was just basically, I wouldn't say I had a testimony. I never went up and bore my testimony, but I trusted my parents that they're smart people. They love me. I know they do, and this is what they want from me. So I trusted them that this is the right thing. Okay. So my testimony was based off of their testimony.
Okay. So how'd you end up on a mission?
Oh man. So I went through my rebellious phase and I went off to play college football at this Division II college in West Virginia. Called? Shepherd College.
And what position?
Inside linebacker.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was pretty good in high school. I was like first team All-State. I got third in state in wrestling.
In Virginia? First team All-State in Virginia?
Yeah.
That's great.
For football and
in wrestling you did what?
Third in state.
Third in state in wrestling? That's
I totally
amazing.
know what all of that means.
You know what that means, right? Third in state?
Great. Congratulations.
It's basically the Super Bowl. I won the Super Bowl. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wow. Great. Put that in my notes.
So I went off to this Division II school to play football. And that was the first time in my life where my parents weren't there to force me to go to church. And that was the first time I didn't go to church for a whole semester. I didn't care about church. I didn't care about religion. I was just like, I'm here to play football and have a good time. School, who cares? But I would show up to some classes, but that semester was one of the hardest semesters for me because here I was partying a lot, doing things I knew were bad. So there was there was a lot of inner guilt and shame about myself because I was partying. I was doing things I knew were wrong. And I didn't go to church for a whole semester, and I remember my parents tried to send the missionaries over to my apartment. Like, hey, do you want to come to church? It's about a 30-minute drive. We could come pick you up. And I was like, no, I'm good. But also that was some of like the most depressing days of my life because I was lost. Like, based on my Mormon upbringing, like you've let go of the rod and therefore that's why you feel sad. That's why you feel depressed. And that was kind of, I was like, man, that's true. And there's this little college on the East Coast called Southern Virginia University.
Yeah, SVU.
Yeah, SVU.
BYU East.
Yeah, exactly. Right? My brother was going there at the time. And he's
just really quickly, listeners. So there's BYU Provo, BYU Idaho, and then BYU Hawaii. For a long, long time, Mormons have wanted other church-sponsored universities because everybody wants to send their kids to Mormon universities so they won't lose their testimony and so they can find a mate.
Yes.
BYU, the church, for whatever reason, has not wanted to expand beyond those three and LDS Business College and whatever else there is. Yeah. And so some entrepreneurs at some point started Southern Virginia University as like a BYU East for Mormon kids to go. Yeah. It's kind of a private school, but it's not officially sponsored by the church, but it tries to be a BYU. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much, same morals and values that BYU has. They try and make sure like the kids, no partying, there's curfews, you can't go in like the opposite sex bedrooms, all these rules to keep you away from the edge of like,
to keep you from having a normative, healthy college experience.
So my brother was going there at the time. He's like, hey, why don't you come visit me before you go back to your, Shepherd College? He's like, why don't you come visit me for a weekend? I'm like, okay, cool. And he was married, at the time, and, they were all super Mormon. And I was like, okay, I'll come visit. I was like, I'm too cool for this school. Like I was like, I party. This isn't a party school, And I went there and met some cool people. And I was like, oh, they have a wrestling team? Okay. I was like, maybe I'll check that out. And then at the end, my brother was like, hey, why don't you look into coming here? And he's like, I know someone in admins, they can get you in. They'll get your records transferred and like all this stuff. And he's like, just think about it. And I remember driving home, and this was another moment where I was like, I felt the spirit to go to that school, to go to Southern Virginia College at the time. SVC is what it was called. because I was miserable at the college I was at. I didn't like my football coach. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll go there and wrestle. So I went there, last minute transfer. And
as a sophomore or?
No, still a freshman.
Okay.
Because I was only at the other college for a semester.
Okay.
And then I went to SVC. Like I went to visit my brother on Saturday. On Monday, I was in class already. I didn't tell my coach at the other school. I didn't tell my teachers.
Wow.
And it was so funny because I had my parents. I was so ashamed.
Did you even drop out? Did you bother to drop out?
Kind of. I had my parents do it. This is how scared I was. I had my mom and dad go back to my old apartment that I was living in and said, I'm too afraid to face my coach, the teachers, my old roommates. I was like, can you go pick up my stuff for me? And so they went to the school, and I felt so bad for my roommate at the time because there was beer bottles, there was like, posters of naked women on the wall, and my parents knock on the door. He opens the door, and I didn't warn him. There's no cell phones back then. So he just opens the door, then like, oh, we're Drew's parents. We're here to get his stuff. And they walk in the room, and there's like beer bottles and, pornography, like posters. And he was so embarrassed, and I felt so bad for him. But he's like, dude, why didn't you tell me your parents were coming? I'm like, I don't know. It was last minute. And so my parents like had to go into the room and get all my stuff. I was kind of a scared kid. I was afraid of confrontation as a kid. So I didn't like having candid conversations with people where
you would learn to hide and lie, right?
Yeah, I was super uncomfortable. So I was like, I'll go to this Mormon school. You guys go get my stuff. And then that's where I decided to go on a mission. I was like, okay, there's some cool people that, are Mormon, and maybe you can be Mormon and cool, And so I started going to church again and was like, okay, I'm going to go on a mission. And all my brothers have gone on missions. We've all, followed the rules. And I was like, okay. And I ended up going on a mission. I went to Brazil.
Okay, wait. Did you have some kind of like spiritual awakening or like testimony affirming thing? Like for me, I wanted to know the church was true. Yeah. And so I had to have this moment where I either like believed it or didn't.
Yeah.
Did you fight for that? Did you have that? Or was it more just like, oh, everyone else is doing it. It seems like the right thing to do. I'll go do it.
Yeah, it was more of the second one.
Okay.
Like everyone else, all my brothers did it. It's the cool thing to do. I should probably do this too. And I later had a conversion story, like on my mission or something that was like, okay, now this is what I believe in. But yeah, there was nothing like that beforehand. It was just like, oh, I know this will make my parents proud. And maybe this is what I should do. So yeah, went to one semester at SVC, Southern Virginia College. Shout out to the Knights, and wrestled there. I got prepared for my mission. Did all the stuff you're supposed to do. Fought with the worthiness, of course. Like not looking at masturbation, not looking at pornography, not masturbating, trying to stay clean to go on this mission was hard, but they let me go. And I went on my mission to Brazil for 2 years.
And Brazil,
that's where I first read the Book of Mormon was
on
in
your
MTC.
And Brazil can be a scary place. What was it like? What was Brazil like really quick?
I loved it. Shout out to my Brazilian friends out there. I love Brazil. It wasn't scary for me at all. I freaking loved it because I went straight to the MTC in Sao Paulo. I didn't go to the Provo MTC. And it was cool to learn another language, meet another people, culture. And it was just a beautiful country.
What year was this?
2000.
2000?
Yeah, 2002 is when I went on my mission. And I freaking loved it. I love my mission. Even though I don't agree with what I was teaching now, but I had so many cool experiences, met so many cool people. And I think you should take every American teenager, especially that's spoiled, put them in a third world country for 6 months and show them what life is like outside of the United States. So they don't grow up in this bubble of like, complaining about Wi-Fi or complaining about their coffee not made right or complaining about these first world problems. Put them in a third world country. You will grow up way more in those 6 months than any other experience that you can have here in the United States. So I freaking loved Brazil. I loved the people, I loved the culture. And I had a great time.
Get along with your companions and...
Not all of them. It was really hard. Because I had that same like sports discipline and like the discipline my dad instilled in me of like, hey, we gotta be perfect. So no slacking, no complaining. like no rest, no, like we have to be strong. We have to be like letter of the law. We have to do everything like right. Because otherwise we're not going to baptize people. And it's like, oh, we didn't baptize people. You sinned, or I sinned, or something happened.
Oh
like,
no, you're one of those missionaries. Oh my God.
yeah, it was like, it was, but that's kind of the mentality you had. And that's all I knew was like, okay, I'm going to do this 100%, just like football or just like wrestling. I got to go in, got to 100% execute, no mistakes. And yeah, it was hard because in Brazil, there's a lot of like pornography, like on billboards sometimes. And I'd be like, okay, try not to look at that, or half naked girls in the streets, like, and you're taught not to look, and like, that's bad, that's sinful. So there was navigating through that on the mission, but yeah, I don't really have any bad experience on my mission.
Did you actually have like success baptizing people, and did that like confirm to you that if you did like try really hard and be really disciplined, that it had results?
Yeah, because I feel like the culture, the people of Brazil were so welcoming to one, Americans, but also two, this religion that, the way we taught it was actually really brilliant. Like with what it would do to people of like, hey, do you feel something? Do you feel something like, in your heart or in your bosom? Do you feel something? They're like, yeah, I do. Like, that's the Spirit telling you that it's true. And people would be like, yeah, that makes sense. And so we baptized quite a lot of people in Brazil. And then I was like, man, this is the work of the Lord. This is what we're supposed to do.
So you are being converted a little bit as you saw people like being receptive to this message.
Yes.
From a bunch of like dumb 20-year-old American kids. You're like, this must be true if they're listening to us.
Yeah, it's so true. And I like totally was cocky and egotistical. Like, we have the truth. And all these other churches, because there's so many churches, evangelical churches down there. I was like, all these other churches are not true. Like, you guys have half the truth. We have the full truth. And that's kind of what they teach you, and that's what I believe. Like, hey, we have the truth, and I'm sorry, but these other churches, there's some truth there, but we're the only ones with the truth. And that's kind of what I want to get across to people watching this that aren't Mormon is Mormons believe that their church is the one true church on the face of the earth. That's 100% true and real, that all the other churches are not true. Just the Mormon church is true.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And there's no arguing that, but that's what we're taught. Absolutely. That's what's drilled in our heads. And, reading the Book of Mormon for the first time, I was like, oh, this is a cool book. There's all these war stories in the Book of Mormon, and Captain Moroni, and all these cool stories that make you feel good about your beliefs. And I definitely was like, okay, I feel like this is finally the right thing,
Absolutely.
For me, at least.
Okay, so you got off your mission, and what'd you do?
I went to Snow College for a year.
Where's Snow College?
It's middle of nowhere, Utah. Ephraim.
It's in Ephraim, Utah.
Yeah, Ephraim,
Utah. Were you on scholarship there? Or?
No. I kind of didn't know where I wanted to go, and I kind of got an epiphany or spiritual prompting to go to Snow College and play football in hopes to play.
As a walk-on?
As a walk-on.
Okay.
Yeah, in hopes to play at the next level. Lasted there a year, hated it.
Did you walk on?
I did walk on.
You got on?
Yeah, I got on.
Okay, that's a big deal. It's not easy to walk on, even to a division what? What was
Well, they were junior college.
Yeah, even a junior college, it's not easy to walk on, I don't think.
So anyways, I made it there for about a year, but I hated it because it smelled like turkeys. It did not smell good, and there was nothing to do. But also,
like turkeys.
Yeah, I didn't get
Snow
along.
College's PR is like flipping out right now.
Well, I did go back and speak at Snow College.
You did?
Recently, within the past 5 years. So they still like me there.
Oh, good.
But I didn't like my coach at the time. Didn't get along with him, and just felt kind of lost there. So I went back to SVU now, Southern Virginia University. Mm-hmm. And now it was a university instead of a college.
Okay.
And I played football there. And that's where I graduated.
Okay. What'd you study?
Business management. So I got my degree.
And after your mission, was it hard to come off your mission? Was it hard to live the standards? How was your testimony?
I remember, my brothers, funny, we always make fun of ourselves because we came back from our missions. We were all like, who's the most strict? And like, we were all so weird. Like, I remember my brothers coming back from their missions, and I'm like, why are you making me turn Adam Sandler off? Like, let me watch this. And like, why are you like saying this is inappropriate? Like, you're so weird now. And then of course I come back from my mission, and I'm the same way of like this, like, oh, this music is horrible. Like, I only listen to classical and Mormon Tabernacle Choir, or, it was like that, like, how righteous can you be? And it was just like this, silliness almost of like how strict could you be,
Flexing on each other.
flexing on
Mormon
each other.
flexing.
Yeah, Mormon flexing of like how righteous are you? But anyways, I came back, I would say more normal than my brothers did. Because I still listen to rock music. I still listen to like Brazilian like rock. Like it's pretty cool. Like some Brazilian rap too.
Shout out to Brazilian rap and rock.
Yeah, it's good music. So I wanted to catch up on movies. I love movies. And so anyways, I navigated those waters, I would say, pretty well. And then I met my ex-wife, Lynn, in between semesters. I was living in Huntington Beach, California. And we met in Huntington Beach, California. And then that's kind of like the next chapter of my life.
Let's start.
Let's do it.
So yeah.
Yeah, so I met her in Huntington Beach. I was living with my brother out there, just kind of for the summer in between semesters, not sure what I was going to do. Met Lynn, fell in love with her pretty quickly. And I remember, Lynn and I, she was a different breed. She definitely came from a family upbringing where things weren't so strict. She kind of grew up inactive. She went to restaurants on Sundays, and I was like, how could you? Just so strict with the way I was brought up. And we didn't mesh well, but we had a connection, a deep connection between both of us. And she had been coming back to church recently and was like kind of reactivated. And so we kind of connected and on a deeper level. And I fell in love with her pretty quickly. And I was supposed to go back to SVU to play football in the fall. And I wasn't sure because I loved her. So my bishop said, I went to my bishop to talk to him about whether or not what I should do. And he's like, well, do you love her? I'm like, yeah. He's like, then why are you leaving? And I was like, that's a good point. Because you're supposed to go to college, And he's like, well, if you love her, then stay with her. And so I took a semester off school. I got a job out there. We, got engaged. And then I went back to school after I put the ring on her finger. And then so I went back to school at SVU, played football, and she worked, and we got married about a year later.
And you were how old?
25. I was 25.
Was it a temple wedding?
We did get married in the temple. We struggled to make that happen.
Tell our non-Mormon listeners what you mean by you struggled.
Well,
what are the standards and you don't have to go into details.
Sure.
Whatever.
No. Lynn's totally fine with me talking about this, and I don't care. But so we're taught that sexual relations before marriage is bad. And then boom, all of a sudden when you're married, then it's good, right? But of course, when you're connected to someone, you love someone, you want to be physical with them. And so Lynn and I struggled to not be physical, right? We definitely struggled not to be physical. And we had sex before our marriage, and we had confessed that. And this is where things started to shift for us, because I remember one time we had to go confess our sins, right? Because the guilt, the shame, and all that stuff about sexual sins is a serious business in the Mormon church. They want to know every last detail of what you did. So I remember it was super traumatizing for her. We had to go confess our sins to the bishop. I went in first by myself to the bishopric, and they ask you very detailed questions about what happened, who instigated it, who touched who first, did you have intercourse, all these details about it. And I went in. And I was taught to respect authority. So I went in very scared of okay, I have to confess these sins to these men. But this is what you do. I didn't question it. Lynn went in next, and she was so infuriated because of all the details they were asking her. And it was just her with 3 men asking her these intimate details. And she was so traumatized from that experience. She was like, I don't want to go back to church. And I had to tell her this is what we have to do. We have to go through this repentance process. She's like, I don't want to do this. And I wish she was here to talk about her side of the story, but I just remember how traumatized she was from that experience of having to go in with 3 men she didn't really know that well, talk about her sexual life. And that's just kind of what the control the church has over you. And we had a punishment of, I think I was disfellowshipped at the time, which is a big deal. So for people watching that aren't Mormon, excommunicated, I think people know what that means. You're out of the church. Disfellowshipped means you're in the church, but you're kind of what's the right word? Shamed to where you can't pray in public. You can't give people blessings. You can't pass or bless the sacrament. You can't do certain things in the church. And that is super embarrassing and dehumanizing behavior, to where like if someone asked me to pray, I had to be like I can't pray. And they'd be like, why not? In front of everyone, you're like, well, thanks a lot. Now I have to tell you I'm freaking disfellowship, so I can't pray. There. Does that make you feel better? Like, it was so embarrassing to tell people, hey, don't ask me to pray, because I can't.
And for our non-Mormon listeners, I have to, it wasn't until I kind of interviewed with Leah Remini and Mike Rinder where I realized that some of the stuff we do is just outrageous compared to the adult human civilized world outside of like a high demand religion. But now I kind of feel like if my kids came to me and said, Dad, if I find someone I want to marry, should I have sex before I get married? I would say absolutely, not because I don't believe sex is, something that's really special, but because it's something really special, and because marriage is something I take really seriously, and you want to make sure there's compatibility there.
Yes.
So I would want my kids to know their potential spouse in all the different ways.
Yes.
Before they made a lifelong commitment. So, I mean, that feels like what the civilized world would kind of think these days. But in Mormonism, not only are you not supposed to have sex before you commit to eternity to marry somebody, but if you touch someone's breast or they touch you where they shouldn't, then you have to sit as a couple in front of a middle-aged male, go through this shame, I think it's called a shame parade, where you have to confess it. They tell you can't take the sacrament. They tell you can't go to the temple. They may delay your marriage. They may cancel your marriage. And then your parents find out, your siblings find out, everyone in your ward finds out, everyone in your partner's family and their friends find out. And they call it the shame parade. And it's also super inappropriate and humiliating, or at least it can be. Now, that was me just trying to make sure our non-Mormon listeners understand what we're talking about. How would you fill in what I'm missing from that experience?
No, that kind of summed it up perfectly, to be honest with you, because I remember in our singles ward in California, where we were at in Huntington Beach, this bishop was so strict on his view of what sexual sin was, to the point where he gave a talk in sacrament where he talked the whole sacrament, the whole hour, about sexual sin, and how any time, and he drilled it. He was like a militant guy. He's like, if you are kissing someone and you become aroused or they become aroused, you need to go to your bishop and confess that sin as if that's a sexual sin. If the arousal is there, if you cause the arousal of the other person, you are responsible for breaking the law of chastity. He gave a 45-minute lesson on this to all the singles in the ward of, if you guys are kissing, making out to the point where you get aroused, you've crossed the line.
Like
and
the Jesus quote of if any man looketh on another woman commits, was it kind of along those lines that you committed the act of the sexual sin in your heart because of the arousal? Yeah,
that's how detailed and serious he was about it. It was 45 minutes of that. Because all the singles, of course people are pushing the envelope, they're testing the waters. They want to be sexually active, but they're told it's a sin. And they're trying to find these ways, skirting around, okay, well, can I do this? Can I do that? He's like, any arousal, any kind of sexual arousal if you're with someone, because he told me, he was my bishop at the time, and I had to go confess to him. He's like, you need to break up with Lynn. And I was like, why would you tell me? Why? And he's like, because you're just going to keep sinning with her. And I was like, that was for me such horrible advice. And I was so mad. I was so angered by that at the time, because I'm like, I'm not going to break up with her. I hear you're my bishop, and I know I'm supposed to listen to you, but I feel in my heart of hearts, that's wrong. And so that's his advice he gave to anyone. If they messed up sexually before they were married, he had them break up. And that's the advice that he gave me, to break up with Lynn. He's like, yeah, you need to break up with her. Luckily, I switched over and got a different bishop eventually somehow they transferred him or something. And he was much more cool and, didn't care too much about it. But anyways, yes. So shame parade. Yes, that definitely happened. we had to make up lies to our family of like, oh, we couldn't, we want to get married in this temple. And, we had to push it back because Lynn's family couldn't make it. Anything to not tell the truth of like, hey, we had sex. But when we told people like, hey, it's going to be a year from now, I'm sure people assumed or knew that, oh, you're not getting married for a year in the temple. Oh, we know what that means. That means you guys have messed up sexually. And so I was disfellowshipped. I had to go to my bishop on a monthly basis, check in with him, confess to him if I was masturbating or looking at porn. And after about 8 or 9 months, I was re-fellowshipped, which means now I could participate in the church like a normal member. So that veil of shame was lifted from me, I guess you could say. We got married in the temple. It was a beautiful experience. Her family was there. My family was there.
What temple was it?
Mount Timpanogos. Yeah, in Utah. So, and then we went out to Virginia to finish school as a married couple.
Yeah, and it's just I don't believe that the Mormon Church or other high demand religions do this on purpose. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it's a way to keep. I think it's a way to keep people humble. It's a way to keep people submissive. It's a way to exert undue influence over your members and to make them feel like they're broken. It's that broken heart and contrite spirit. They want you to feel broken so that you can feel like you need them to be whole.
Oh, yeah.
And so they create the illness that then they offer themselves up to be the cure of. And again, I don't believe it's intentional. I don't believe it's insidious. It's just the ball. It's just the stone that got cut out from the mountain and is rolling down the hill.
Yes.
But it makes you feel like you owe the church everything and you need the church to be a happy, healthy person because you're fundamentally a bad, broken, awful person. And that's why I'm not a big fan of the sin model, because I think it's, number one, you could make a good argument that healthy sexuality is a good thing, even before marriage.
Yes.
So it's not something you should feel bad about. Yeah. And then you could just argue that just this whole sin model of always feeling bad about yourself isn't necessarily good for your long-term mental health and well-being, and certainly dependence on an organization for your health, happiness, and well-being when that organization may not have the best rules or principles or even your own best interests at heart can sometimes be dangerous or even deadly. Yeah. And that's, again, it's not that I'm anti the church or anti-Christian, but there's deep problems with this shame cycle model, I think.
Well, and my lowest of lows were at those moments of being disfellowshipped and like just feeling so like, once again, like a failure. And then when I was re-fellowshipped into the church, it was like this high of highs where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. I'm so blessed. So they created that like or in my mind, I was like, I'm this horrible person. I need to go through this. I need to punish myself. And then, oh my gosh, they had this mercy to re-fellowship me into the church. Like I feel so grateful for that, And that's kind of, that's kind of that type of control that, that the church can have or any church can have. Right. So anyways, we got married in the temple. That was pretty cool.
Really quick. A lot of people have feelings about the actual temple ceremony. Yeah. Mark talked about him not loving it, but also his wife not loving it. Mm-hmm. It's also a very sensitive thing in Mormonism to talk about the temple. Yeah. Is there anything you want to say about your temple experience, or not say? That's okay too. Right?
No. I'll talk about it. I remember my first experience with the temple was when my older brother got married. He came out of the temple and he had this like line across his head, and I was a teenage kid. I was like, what were you wearing? Like you have this like crease in your skin, like you were wearing a hat. And he's like, I can't tell you. I'm like,
that's more information than any other.
Yeah, I was like, what is that? I was like, why were you wearing something? Like, what were you wearing? I was like, so like weirded out by it. Like, dude, just tell me. He's like, I can't tell you. And so I was like, one, kind of weirded out by that. But then when I went in the temple,
why couldn't you tell him? Or he tell you? Why couldn't he tell you?
John's walking around the room fixing something. I'll repeat that into the microphone. Why couldn't your brother tell you what he was wearing in the temple?
He didn't really say why. He just said, oh, you'll find out one day kind of thing. But because in the temple, you are sworn to secrecy to never reveal the secrets of the temple. Otherwise, you have to, I know before my day, it was like you have to, slit your throat, or, it'd be better to, what is it? Kill yourself or
disemboweled, cut your throat. There were just kind of these death oaths that you had to give when I went through the temple for the first time. Basically saying, if you ever divulge what goes on in here, it's better that you die. And so it's a relic or a holdover from the Masonic Lodge temple ceremony, because Joseph Smith was a Mason. He basically just remixed Masonry into Mormonism in the Mormon temple ceremony. And then, and so all these signs and tokens and penalties were all part of it. And so it's super secret. It was actually very violent. It's still super weird. And so everyone's afraid to talk about it. And so it's one of the worst kept secrets now because of YouTube and New Name Noah and all that,
I've seen those videos.
But your brother, Mormons have been going through this for a couple hundred years, but they can never tell anyone. And so when you go to the temple for the first time as a Mormon teen, you don't know hardly anything, right? And no one can tell you.
No, I thought it was so weird because you're in this like white cloth, you're butt naked underneath, and people are touching you. These old people are touching you in certain places of your body, like your head, your chest, your neck, your loins, which I don't remember where the loins was, but it was somewhere close to your crotch area, not on your crotch. I'm not saying it was your crotch, but
at my laptop, I'll pull it up right now. Just kidding.
like they're kind of blessing you, but they're kind of touching you underneath your robe. They didn't touch your junk or anything, your private parts, but they touched close, and you just feel really weird. Like, okay, this is, I guess, what my parents do, and I trust them. So my mentality going into it was like, yeah, this is weird. I don't know how to do this. Like, you kind of have to use the tokens and signs to get through certain parts of the temple. And I was like, this feels really weird to me, but I didn't question it. That's the thing, is I was just like, okay, that's the experience. And I just threw out like, the weird part of it and just be like, okay, I just won't focus on that. That's kind of my mentality. So she went through it too. Yeah, it was weird for her, but I think she trusted me. She trusted her family. And we made it through. Like, we both were like, okay, this is weird. And yeah, these are definitely not sexy, these garments. But I was like, okay, we'll work through it somehow. Because you have to wear these underwear that kind of are just not very attractive underwear. Let's just say that.
Mm-hmm. Garments,
so,
they're called.
Garments is what they're called.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I didn't say it was traumatizing for her. I just think we both thought it was really weird, but this is kind of what our parents do and our family does, and we'll just like not question it.
Yeah.
That was my mentality.
Okay.
So
you got married.
So we got married, moved to Virginia, finished up school, got a degree, got a job, moved to Illinois. We were like, that was probably our happiest time of our life, was moving to Illinois. We were still, active members. We went to church and we were doing our own thing as this young couple, no kids, decent income, bought our first house. We're kind of living the life for like 2-3 years. And then we moved to Utah in 2008, 2009 because the economy, tanked. And the company I was working for was going bankrupt. Chrysler. I was a financial analyst for Chrysler.
Nice.
And they bought me out and said, hey, we basically, here, take this check. We can't, you can't work here anymore. And I was like, okay. So we moved to Utah, and boom, we got pregnant pretty quick. Like, maybe there's something in the water here where we tried to get pregnant before that, but we couldn't. And so we get pregnant, had 2 kids here in Utah, and okay, this is, I think, where it gets hard.
What year are we at this point?
2008, 2009 is when we moved to Utah. So we got married in 2005.
Okay.
And, this part of my story, I've opened up and talked about my divorce. We were married for about 10 years. But kind of tying it all together, there was this, like I said, there was this part of me that would protect myself by not talking about the things that brought me shame. And that was how I survived, was pretending like things were okay. So going back to when Lynn and I were dating, she asked me if I looked at pornography. And this was before we were engaged, and I told her yes. And that was such a hard thing for her to accept. She was not happy, and she was disgusted, and she was heartbroken.
Because Kara, and I'm just going to ask Kara for this. Kara, what's a Mormon girl taught to think about porn and to expect or even demand from maybe her husband? Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah. You were taught to kind of look up to the highest priesthood holders that are around you. And those people would never look at porn. Those people are so righteous and completely always have complete control over any of these normal sexual inclinations. And so you want to strive to only date people that could go on to be a bishop or stake president or a general authority. And you're looking for the strongest testimony possible in the person that you're dating. And so porn is like
masturbation and porn, right?
Masturbation and porn sometimes can be a deal breaker too. It's so common now. I don't think it is quite a deal breaker as it could be. You know what I mean? But like, it's to a girl who's dating, you're looking for somebody who has so much better control over their inclinations than that, and it kind of puts you taken aback that now you have to kind of, okay, this relationship, you're down here, I'm up here. My hand's always going to be,
meaning who's down there?
Your boyfriend, your fiance, or your husband.
Yeah.
Because from now on, I'm the one who's right with God in
you're
most
not
areas.
Looking at porn.
I'm not looking at porn.
Hopefully.
Because I'm taught to repress my sexual desires, of course. And
because women don't have sexual desires, right?
Yeah. So I think it creates from the very get-go a kind of weird little imbalance, but where you're always trying to be like, oh, okay, we have to wait for you. You're the ones who's got the problem now. We have to go to the bishop, yada, yada, yada. So.
And what words would be associated in your mind with a husband looking at porn or masturbating? In your mind, what would be the adjectives that would come up for that as a Mormon wife?
That's a hard question to ask me because I wasn't that type of person, so it's hard to even retreat back to that. But I would assume that just weak, dirty. That
disgusting, horrible.
Yeah, that porn is the grossest, muckiest, most disgusting thing that could ever exist in the world, and that this person I love is entrenched in that. It just kind of
infidelity, right?
Yeah, those things.
Cheater.
If they would do that, what's stopping them from going out and cheating on
almost
me?
Child molester. That's like one step away from being a right.
Yeah. I also want to clarify, since you are asking me a question. People were confused who just joined the chat why I'm talking and who I am. So hi, I'm Nuance Ho. I'm Kara Burrell. I am co-hosting and producing this episode. I have just met Drew today. I am not part of his story.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you're not his wife or ex-wife.
Yeah, I'm not like.
Okay. And thanks for.
It's important to put.
I think it's fun we're trying this out, but I think it's fun to have a female perspective. But also, Kara's helping doing the video and the audio and the note taking and production stuff. So we're just trying this out. But I'm really happy you're here, Kara.
Yeah.
Okay, so Drew, how much of that is right on versus not?
Yeah, stepping into Lynn's shoes, it's hard for women in the church because it's fear-based mentality of like, okay, my boyfriend is looking at pornography, which we both know is evil and bad and wrong and disgusting and horrible, and that means he's not this person, this righteous priesthood holder that I thought he was. And there's a lot of I think for women it's hard because they think there's something wrong with them. Like, oh, if I was prettier or if I was sexier or this or that, then my husband wouldn't be into porn, and they put the pressure on themselves and make it about themselves. Like if I was different, maybe there's something wrong with me. And that's the hard part as a man. You're like, this has nothing to do with you. Like you could be the hottest girl in the world. Porn is just this thing that I've always been attached to because of my perception of it was this forbidden fruit, this thing that was so exciting and cool because it was also it was bad and disgusting, horrible. And so you don't know how to navigate those waters. There's no safe, healthy outlet to talk about your porn addiction. You couldn't go to I couldn't go to my dad or my brothers or my church leaders. It was just like, hey, don't do it. Hey, don't look at it. It's like, okay, cool. That really helps. That doesn't help a teenage kid to be like, hey, just stop doing that. Otherwise there's a punishment. It doesn't always make them not want to do it. So the reason I bring that experience up was because she was so turned off by it and so traumatized by me telling her that I looked at porn. I was like, it's solidified in my brain. Okay, I can never tell her again that I look at porn because she almost broke up with me. She was so, it was so detrimental to her that she almost ended our relationship. So I was like, I said all the right things. I was like, I'll never look at porn again. I promise you, it's just a phase. Like, I could easily stop it whenever I want to. I will never look at porn again. I love you. Let's get married. And then that was the end of it. And so that experience kind of solidified in my brain, like, hey, don't tell people about this. Don't tell people about this disgusting, horrible sin you have, because that just hurts them. And so I was like, okay. You know, of course I didn't stop looking at porn. I continued to. I tried really hard not to, but I just hid it and pretended I didn't do it for years and years and years and years. I was living this lie, this inauthentic life of like, yeah, I look at porn, but I feel so disgusted with myself.
And so the same model that you learned in your church, which is to hide and lie and suppress, and to live kind of this double life, now gets replicated in your marriage, which is toxic for marriages. As someone who's studied this and counseled lots of people, you know, a strong, healthy marriage is one where you can be vulnerable, emotionally intimate, where you tell each other everything. That's, in my opinion, what makes a strong marriage. Yeah. But because of the Mormon upbringing, you learn to hide and lie and keep things from your spouse and to keep things secret, to feel all this guilt and shame. Yeah. And it sets many marriages up for failure, I believe.
Yes, 100%. It definitely caused so many issues, unfortunately, between us, because now I was in this mentality of like, hey, you're a failure. You're already a screw up. You're already hiding these things. What's to keep you from doing more? And to make a long story short, fast forward to 2009-ish, I got a new job in the medical field and I had to go away for 6 weeks. And this job required me to travel to Colorado for 6 weeks, where I had to train under this new company to learn their methods. And so I was there for 6 weeks by myself, without her. She had to stay behind. We had a baby, so she had to stay behind, and I was there for 6 weeks training. And there was this other girl there that was going through training with me. And it's so interesting because the night before I left, my ex-wife, Lynn, had a dream that I had cheated on her. And she woke up like crying, like, you know, she was heartbroken as if it happened. And I remember when she woke up, I was like, I would never do that to you. I would never cheat on you. And I swore to her I never would. And I truly believed that. I really did. But then being gone for 6 weeks, there was this other girl there. We started spending, 8 hours a day in class learning. It was just us two. We became friends. We started studying together. And before you know it, I had an affair. And my mentality was hide it. Don't tell anyone about it. Don't tell her, Lynn, because for Lynn, that was her worst fear. Her dad cheated on her mom, and she told me, this is my worst fear, and don't ever do that. And I was like, I will never do that. And then I did it. And the reason I'm telling this story now is, I've talked about this on my podcast, is because I'm totally fine with talking about this and owning my story. There's a lot of self-hate. And I think for me, the reason, why did I do that? I wouldn't say our marriage was struggling. Our marriage was horrible. We didn't have like a sexless marriage. I think it goes back to me hating myself and seeing myself as a failure my whole life. And when you see yourself as a failure, you hate yourself, you do self-sabotage sometimes. And you choose those decisions are wrong, are bad. But it's because you think you deserve the worst. You think you're already a failure, so why not keep failing? Because you believe that, And so that was another testament to me being a failure. So I hated myself. I hid it from her for about a year. She found out about it.
Was it an ongoing relationship or just?
It was just during those 6 weeks. When I was there, something that happened. I was infatuated, and it was just kind of like this is so exciting. I've never done this before. This is dangerous. This is bad. I shouldn't be doing this. But, there was kind of this excitement to it for sure.
Did she feel the same way? This woman, was she married as well? Was this?
She had a boyfriend. Okay. I think she had a boyfriend at the time. Yeah, she felt the same way. She was Christian, a different religion. But same thing. And, it wasn't like I was going to leave Lynn or divorce her for this girl, but there was definitely some feelings there of, man, this girl's so cool and all that. It was an infatuation for sure. And it was just something, for me, it took me years to figure out why I did it, first of all, because I couldn't understand why I did it. Like, why would I do that? Why would I do that to Lynn? I knew this was her worst fear. This was something that she told me, I can't have you do this. And why did I do it? Like, I didn't know at the time, until I'll talk about this life coach later helped me figure out why you do things when you see yourself as a failure. And this applies to other aspects of our life, like health and fitness, exercise, diet, other areas of our life where we believe we're a failure. We don't believe we deserve better. So we choose these self-sabotage behaviors because we don't truly believe we're worthy. And I think it could be an affair. It could be all kinds of things. It could be, binge eating. It could be all kinds of unhealthy behaviors.
So can I ask you a question? Did it seem like because you already had a previous history with this sexual sin that just felt like your failure, that was the place? If I'm going to mess up, it's going to be this place.
Yeah.
And
that was kind of like my outlet.
Yeah.
Sexual sins.
That you've already just established that you're a failure in that area.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a surprise almost that you're like, I'm just going to continue this type of mess up.
Yeah, it was something I was comfortable with. I knew very well, like that shame, that feeling was like sexual sin was kind of like, I didn't go out and drink. I didn't go out and like do drugs or anything. I just kind of like the sexual sin was, I became so familiar with it because that's kind of my method I used as a teenage kid and just kind of stayed in that. But the affair thing, I didn't think would ever happen. I really didn't. And anyways, a year goes by or so and she finds out and I'm like, she's devastated. She's heartbroken. I hate myself even more. I remember I was home teaching a lesson and I get a text from her, like, get home right now. Like, I saw this email. I know everything. And I was in the middle of like teaching a home teaching lesson. I was like, I got to go home. My wife needs me. She's pregnant and she needs some help or something like that. I made up a story and I left and my heart sank. I was like, this is it. So, that was really hard for her. That was really hard for me. And like I said, I'm open to talking about this because, I'm such a different person than who I was back then, and I've learned so much about myself. I want to share this in hopes to help people that are stuck in that guilt, shame cycle before you do the affair, before you go past, just pornography. Fix this part of you, open up, be vulnerable about it before it leads to something else that you're going to regret even more. So I want to give people that courage and that hope,
I just want to add, obviously affairs happen in and out of all religions. We're not going to blame Mormonism for any affair that happens. And I also want to say that if you are taught to hide and lie around sexual shame since you're 12 or 13, you might be more primed to hide and lie about sexual things when you're an adult. Whereas if you're taught that you're safe, that you can be honest and open, that we're just all learning here. Yeah. And there's not so much shame and wrapped around sexual matters. Maybe you can enter into adult relationships and or marriages where you can talk about your feelings and you can talk about things openly. And you haven't spent the past 10 or 15 years of your life living a double life and hiding and lying. That's not to blame religion or Mormonism for infidelity. It happens. Yeah. Atheists and agnostics do it too. Yeah. It's sort of part of the human experience in some ways, but I can't imagine that learning to hide and lie for 10 or 15 or 20 years doesn't have an influence on how you would communicate with your spouse once you're married.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I shared that story of her getting so upset when I told her about pornography. That kind of solidified in my brain, okay, don't tell people that you love things that you know are going to hurt them. Just suppress it, pretend it doesn't exist, and just do better, right? Just man up and be perfect. And so that kind of behavior definitely influenced it for sure. But, I own my story of what I did. And so it broke her heart. It definitely, I thought we were going to get divorced. We went through some like really shameful things after that of like, okay, I was willing to do anything. I went to the church addiction recovery program. We went to counseling. I was disfellowshipped again. Went through that whole process, and I remember I couldn't even bless my baby when my baby was born, and that was like the most shameful thing. I had to lie to my family about why we weren't blessing the baby at a certain time and why we did it in secret. There was all this kind of like shame and guilt around like me being disfellowshipped and what had happened, because I didn't want people to find out about it. I was so worried about what other people thought about me. So, that's a big part of the story. We stayed together for about 5 years after that. We stayed together for 5 years or so. Went through ups and downs of like counseling and trying to work through it, and trying to figure out what we do. We still went to church this time. We're still faithful members. We couldn't go to the temple, of course, for a long time because of that. But eventually I got refellowshipped, and we went back to church, and I tried to live this perfect life. I went to addiction recovery, which I think addiction recovery in the church, and what that is for people listening, is the church has this program. It's a 12-step program for people with all kinds of addictions. But I mean, let's be honest, it's mostly porn addiction, because that's probably the most common thing in the church for men to be addicted to is pornography, and they don't know how to deal with it. So the church came up with their own program, 12-step program, to help men through that, porn addiction, whatever you want to call it. The only thing I say that came out of that, John, was it helped to normalize pornography for me. I saw all these normal dudes that were just dads like me that grew up in the same culture I did, and these are all just normal guys who look at porn. They just happen to look at porn, and there's so much guilt and shame, and there was hope there where, maybe we can normalize this, and maybe you can overcome this addiction, and maybe there's some hope, right? That I would say that's the only good part of it. Now, there were some weird stuff, the way they go about it, where they try and recover you through like a Mormon way of doing things. But I think the thing I took away from it was just normalizing it, that I'm not some weird, disgusting, horrible human because I look at porn.
No, and just to explain things to our non-Mormon listeners, so what the Mormon Church did is it took the Alcoholics Anonymous model, the 12-step program, imported it into Mormonism, made a few changes, and then they opened up addiction recovery groups led by like senior missionaries, like retired old Mormons who were looking for work, who were untrained mental health professionals.
Yes.
And any Mormon ward and or stake across the country has an addiction recovery program led by these, old couples largely. And it's all these Mormon, mostly men, mostly married men, who are in this group, who normally, this group that's been designed for alcoholics, drug addicts, etc. But really what it is they're in there as addicts for masturbation. Yeah. And sometimes the masturbation is as infrequent as once a month.
Yes, that's
But they're treated like addicts. They're called addicts. They refer to themselves as addicts.
Yeah.
And they're in this 12-step program to try and cure themselves of an addiction. And if you think I'm crazy, go to the LDS Church's website, type in addiction recovery program. There's a map that you can find to find a local ARP group near you. You type in the zip code for let's just say Salt Lake City. There's something like 150 to 200 ARP groups just between Ogden and Provo.
Yeah.
And all these, and they're all over the country. And all these groups are literally just legions of largely straight Mormon men, some gay Mormon men. Occasionally there are women there, but they're there to try and cure themselves of the addiction of masturbation.
Yes. And looking at porn. So that's kind of the 12.
And there's so much shame, right?
So much shame. Like I was when I got found out, when she found the email, I was open to I will do anything to prove to you that I love you, that I can change. I'll go to addiction recovery. I'll be disfellowshipped. I will disable my Facebook accounts. I'll let you check my phone. I'll do all these things to show you that I can change. And my hope was that I could. And I really believed that I could. I went, to counseling and did what I could to kind of, better myself. And it was so shameful. I would say the most dehumanizing part of this whole experience was one part of the addiction recovery program was they had you write down in detail every sin that you can remember, in detail. everything that you've done that you feel disgusted about, you have to write down all those sins and you have to show someone. You have to confess all of those sexual sins to someone. And I remember I went to my ex-wife, Lynn. I know I wasn't supposed to pick her, but I was like, I can't go to anyone else. Can you this is part of the process. Will you look at this? And after about like 5 minutes of looking at it, she was just so infuriated and just, I could tell like she just
you or the process
of what she was reading, of all these things that I had hid from her. All these disgusting sexual acts, like looking at porn while she was asleep. All these little details. I had to write down everything I could recollect. Every tiny like memory I had of like sexual sin in my entire life. I was like, hey, can I show these to you? And after like a couple of minutes, she's like, this is disgusting. You're a horrible human being. And like,
what does that do to a marriage?
I don't know how we survived after that, but we eventually didn't. We eventually got divorced, right? But what that did was just in the moment, she looked at me as almost, like I said, inhuman. Like it's such a dehumanizing method that's used to make me feel so disgusted with myself, so ashamed that maybe in that disgusting self-hate, I will change. I will be like, why am I doing this to her? Why am I doing this to myself? I need to change. And that kind of dehumanizing behavior definitely, for a period of time, like I said, it maybe helped slightly, but looking back on it now, was so unhealthy. And I definitely don't agree with that method of breaking someone down to where they're barely even human and then trying to build them back up and put things together as if everything's going to be okay. So nothing was okay after that. We eventually got divorced, make a long story short. And it wasn't because I had cheated on her again. I was faithful to her after that.
Do you feel like she at some point was able to trust him, forgive you and trust you again?
No, I think the thing that came, that the reason we broke up or got divorced was because it was literally killing her physically, emotionally, spiritually, trying to trust me again. But then her brain, every time I go on a business trip, or every time I go to the gym, every time I'm out alone on my phone, she doesn't know. I've lied to her face before in the past about who I was and what I was doing. What is going to cause her to believe me now? So that trust was never there, even though I'd be like, check my phone. You can check my phone. I promise you I'm not doing these things. Check my computer. I try to prove to her that I was perfect again and that I had changed. And that isn't healthy either. Like that wasn't healthy for me to just constantly be on eggshells. Like, look, I'm not doing anything. And then we would watch a movie with infidelity happening and then just cringe, like that feeling of like, yeah, this isn't funny anymore. This isn't fun. And so she would go to bed crying and I would feel bad about myself. And there was roller coasters. There was moments where we were laughing and intimate again. And there was moments where we were like, she would cry herself to sleep. And it never really fully got better until we met this life coach here in Salt Lake City. Her name is Kathryn Dixon. She does The Work by Byron Katie. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I met her, that's where my life changed. That's where...
Is this after the divorce or before?
This is before the divorce, okay. Right before the divorce. And Kathryn was the first person in this world that taught me to learn how to love myself. No church leader, no adult in my life to that point ever convinced me that I was lovable and that I was worthy. She was the first person to teach me to learn how to love myself. It was a 3-hour session. I cried harder than I've ever cried in my life. And I cried like a baby in that session with her. But by the end of the session, the way the work, and Tim Ferriss talks about this on his podcast. He's a big fan of the work and how the methods, the Byron 4 Katie's questions. Great. Yeah, I recommend anyone out there read her book, Loving What Is by Byron Katie. That first session totally flipped things around where I had this glimmer of hope that maybe I am lovable despite my past. Maybe I'm lovable despite having an affair and being addicted to porn and masturbating and having all these sins. Maybe I am still worthy. And that was the first time where I'm like, maybe I don't have to define myself by my past. And then working with her, I was able to finally embrace vulnerability as a strength. I started reading Brené Brown's books. Daring Greatly is one I highly recommend to anyone out there that deals with guilt and shame about your past. Read Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, Braving the Wilderness. Those 3 books by Brené Brown. Highly, highly recommend those books in shifting your perception of you and what you've done in the past and all the things that have brought you shame. one of the things I learned about shame is the more you keep it quiet, the more you suppress it, the louder, the more control it has over you. And when you finally embrace vulnerability and you open up and talk about those things that bring you shame, guess what? That shame has less and less control over you the more open and honest you are. And I remember one of the things that inspired me to eventually share my story was listening to Terry Crews, this actor, very famous in Hollywood, big muscly guy. We see him in the Old Spice commercials, very funny. He did a Facebook Live one day where he talked about his pornography addiction. I'm like, dude, how is this guy, this Hollywood actor, just your man's man, able to come on Facebook Live and talk about pornography addiction? Like, that was so inspiring to me. And I was like, man, I hope one day I can share my story and be brave enough to share my story publicly like him, because that's where I feel like real healing happens. And so the first thing I did was, first of all, be open to life coaching. I wasn't open to therapy or life coaching because that's what, at least my perception of our culture in the church was, all your answers are here. You just need to pray, read the scriptures, go to the temple, listen to your bishop, and you will have all the answers you need. Doing the work by Byron Katie, reading Brené Brown's books, I started to embrace vulnerability as a strength. I had hit rock bottom, and I was like, I'm willing to learn any new methods. I started meditating at this time, and this is where things with the church started to unravel for me as well, around this same time, where I started learning these techniques and methods and reading Brené Brown's work and working with Kathryn Dixon, doing the work. Like, that's where some things with Lynn changed our trajectory because of the church, because of what happened.
I just want to kind of, I just had kind of an aha moment,
Sure.
and I want to float it, and you or Kara, you guys can check me on this. Like, if the church needs you to be broken so that you need them, there's a degree to which I would say subconsciously the church doesn't want you to become whole and healthy.
Yeah.
That probably sounds weird because, again, I'm not saying that the church leaders are going, how do we keep people sinful and broken? But they really don't have an incentive for you to be super healthy and happy, or you might not need them anymore.
Yeah.
And so I'm noticing the irony that the truths and the principles that you are learning in your story, in this chronology, that help you become honest and whole and lose the shame and become more emotionally aware, to become more in tune, more mature, even less toxically male, whatever. Yeah. You're learning these outside of Mormonism from New Age gurus or wisdom leaders that the church would never want to ever quote in general conference. And you're not learning them from Neil A. Maxwell, Gordon B. Hinckley, Thomas S. Monson, your priesthood manual, elders quorum, all the years, decades of Mormon instruction. You're not learning basic marriage skills. You're not learning basic emotional health. You're not learning honesty, true honesty. You're not learning vulnerability. You're not learning emotional maturity, communication skills, because those things are never taught in a Mormon context. Am I wrong, Drew? Am I wrong, Kara?
No, you're absolutely right. And that these kinds of things you can't find within the church. And this is why when I started using these tools, it was so helpful. It got me because the thing with the church is that all the tools. Like, okay, here's the scriptures, this is the lesson. There's nothing really new if you're just reading the Book of Mormon over and over again a million times. There's no new methods or techniques that you're learning. But if you read some new, some researcher on shame and guilt come out with a book called Daring Greatly, you're learning all these new methods of like, man, that makes perfect sense. That right there is helping me see these, epiphanies where I'm like, oh, I see my situation through a new light now. I see this new perspective that I couldn't see before because I only had like 4 or 5 tools to use. Now I have all these other tools, and it's like light years ahead of what I had learned in this bubble over here. So sorry.
No, don't. Sorry, you're the guest. Don't apologize. You're the guest, Drew.
Kara too.
Kara, did you want to add anything, or no pressure if you don't?
Yeah, I'm really happy that you brought up this subject because from a Mormon's perspective, if you think that you have the truth and these men talk to God, what could be better than hearing from that kind of mouthpiece of God the best information on everything that you need to live a good, fulfilling, healthy, happy life in marriage? And the idea that, you'll find things like Brené Brown and you'll find other things, but nothing's going to compare to the light and knowledge and wisdom of these men. And it just sounds like it really fell short at convincing you of your worth. Yeah. So as somebody, I told in my Mormon story about how I was very convinced actually by the ideas around divine nature as a woman, and I didn't have to feel a lot of those feelings of shame. And so I kind of like escaped. Luckily, a lot of those teachings went over my head, and I didn't have a lot of that horrible sexual repression and things because I attached myself to the healthiest possible interpretation of the scriptures and those things. Yeah. And so I'm really glad that we're bringing up that part of this, your history. But then also I wanted to ask, so to a Mormon who's listening to this, somebody who doesn't understand how this shame is not necessary. This shame is very much an invented mechanism. I've just been reading a little bit of the comments here, and I'll say one person, is I don't think quite attaching and understanding why you were talking about the shame that you felt that led to your infidelity. Whereas I think a normal Mormon in the church would just say, oh, obviously 1 + 2 = 3. If you're looking at porn, you just went the next level. And that obviously led to then going outside of a computer screen into the real life. To whatever you want to say to that kind of that argument or that comment.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I can't change someone's perception if that's the way that after hearing my story, that's the way they're going to look at it. And I can't control that. So I don't really have anything to convince them of like, no, this is my story and this is my experience. I can't do a whole lot other than say, hey, I know for a fact that the shame and the guilt that I had growing up caused my behavior to be a certain way to where, I looked at myself as a failure. And so because I looked at myself as a failure, I continue to do failure-like things, whether it was an affair, whether the affair happened or not. The sense of shame and self-hate and failure-like feelings were there before the affair happened. And, I feel like, for Lynn and I, we didn't get divorced just because of the affair. It wasn't like she divorced me the next day after that affair happened. And so I feel like people that are just looking at this from an outside perspective are missing, a lot of the human components of the story and just jumping to conclusions like, oh, you looked at porn. Oh, then you did this bad thing next. Got it. That's end of story for me. That's all I need to know. It's like, this is why I wear this shirt that says empathy on it, because empathy for me is truly listening to understand someone instead of listening to judge someone, listening to respond or critique, because you just don't care enough to hear someone's story. And that's why it's so hard to hate someone close up. Once you hear their story, once you listen to them, then you truly understand why they do what they do. But if you're just listening to judge and jump to conclusions, I feel like that says a lot more about you than it does about, me and my story and what I did. Like I can connect the dots easy because I lived that experience. I know what happened in my life that led me to that. So it's hard for someone that's listening to be like, oh, okay, wait, so you porn, okay, fair, okay, yeah, no, I've heard the story before,
And you're making, were you going to say something else? Okay. Yeah. And you're making me, this is reminding me of the Shakespeare interview. So I did an interview with Matthew Shakespeare.
Yes, I remember that.
And Matthew was a bishop who had an affair. And that's actually been the most controversial Mormon Stories podcast episode since probably Mike Norton Knew Name Noah.
Yeah.
And it's because everybody felt like, because Matt was trying to explain what happened with Elizabeth, the woman that he was counseling, they immediately interpreted an attempt to understand or explain with, they sort of viewed that as trying to make an excuse or blame someone else for bad behavior. And I just believe there has to be a way for someone to be able to tell their story and try their best to sort of say, how did this happen? Let me explore and figure out why this happened. Because I didn't want to do that. I don't think I'm an evil monster. Yeah. So how did this happen? There has to be a way for people to be able to explain what their experience is without immediately just saying, number one, oh, it must have been porn. Yeah. Or, oh, you left the church, or whatever. Yeah. So that's why you did it. Or to equate and attempt to understand, in other words, to develop self-empathy or empathy for someone else, to equate that with excuse making or trying to not take responsibility. Because I don't hear at all you saying that you weren't responsible for your actions. And just to be clear, we are not blaming the Mormon church for infidelity. Yeah. It happens everywhere, in and out of Mormonism, in and out of religion. That is not what we're doing. Yeah. But it's if we want to learn from bad behavior, if we want to learn, and of course, infidelity is bad behavior. Yeah. If we want to learn from bad behavior and maybe even have a chance for other generations to avoid it when other people might have fallen into it.
Yeah.
Doesn't it help to try and understand it and see maybe if we had approached things differently, maybe it would have happened a little bit less. That doesn't mean we're ever going to eradicate pornography or masturbation or infidelity, but certainly understanding these things. Maybe for our listeners and viewers, maybe there's young people listening, other people that are considering an affair. Maybe check out Byron Katie, check out Brené Brown, check out Getting Emotionally Healthy, check out Honesty, check out Emotional Intimacy, get a coach.
Yeah.
Maybe you can avoid infidelity if you listen to some of the lessons that Drew is. And I should have to say, several listeners are saying this. It is so courageous of you to just stand here and admit an infidelity, to be open and honest about that, and to be vulnerable. And I think that doesn't mean that you should be shamed. It means I believe you should be congratulated for your willingness to be open and honest and vulnerable. That's what I think.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think there's something to be said, and Brené Brown talks about this too. It's not the critic that counts, it's the man in the arena. So I'm willing to step into the arena. I'm willing to talk about those vulnerable things and be open and honest and own my story. There's power in owning your story, and stepping into the arena, you leave yourself open for the critics out there that are going to watch from the stands and be like, "Boo, you did this. I hate you." Like, cool, but that the critics aren't the ones that count, in my opinion.
That's the Teddy Roosevelt quote. That's the
Teddy Roosevelt
quote that Brené Brown
uses in her in some of her work, which is perfect. It's perfect for this specific situation as well, because it's so easy on social media just to sit back and be like, oh, I don't have time to listen to the whole story. Therefore, I'm just going to make this quick little judgment and like make that assumption in my head of that's all that happens. It's like the reason I want to share this is to give people out there that maybe don't know themselves, or maybe they've been affected by an affair, to look at things through a new lens instead of hate and resentment and anger that you hold on to. Maybe if you learn to understand it and you can empathize, you can see it through a new lens, and you don't have to see it as this bad, horrible, disgusting thing. And that's why I like Esther Perel's work. She talks a lot about, what's the name of her book? Do any of you guys know her books?
After the
Mating in Captivity, and then the other one is The State of Affairs.
State of Affairs.
A very good book on infidelity and monogamy and all that stuff, and it definitely can help out a lot of people that they might have a perception of infidelity and affairs. And let me just say this really quick. Even with the affair, even with the hurt, the pain, Lynn, my ex-wife, and I are still good friends to this day, to where we have a good co-parenting relationship. It's healthy. We've both done the work on ourselves to where she doesn't have to feel the guilt and the shame and the self-hate that happened because of the affair. And she can look at me and not hate me and despise me and keep my kids from me. Why? Because she's done the work on herself, and she's come to realize that my affair had nothing to do with her. My infidelity had nothing to do with her, and she's free from that. But it took her years to learn that, because when it first happens, all that fear-based thinking is, I should have been different. I could have done that. I could have done this. And I think a lot of women, go there. And I think it's hard to explain to someone, my affair, my shit, I'll say it, my shit has nothing to do with other people. It has to do with how I view myself. Everything that we do in this life is a reflection of how we see ourselves. We are a mirror of how we treat other people is a mirror of how we see ourselves, right? So if you see yourself as a failure, if you judge yourself, you hate yourself, guess what? You're going to see other people through that same lens. And this is why empathy is so powerful. And this is why I'm trying to bring more empathy to the fitness industry, is because if you can have empathy for yourself first and foremost, because we all know we've made mistakes. We all know we've done things that are wrong. If you can have empathy for yourself first and foremost, it's going to be easier to empathize with other people that maybe in the past you might have judged, you might have disagreed with. And this is why this world needs more empathy now more than ever. I'm trying to bring empathy to the fitness industry, because there's a lot of judgment that goes on in the fitness industry, based on body image. And this is why I think Brené Brown's work is so important, is because we need to learn to develop empathy for ourselves And then after that, we can learn to develop empathy for other people. And this world will be a much, much better place if we listen to understand instead of listen to judge and critique. So anyways.
I'm so happy that you and your wife have a good
ex-wife,
ex-wife have a good co-parenting, and that she's able to understand and like kind of untangle the reasons why you did things. That's really inspiring that you guys have gotten to that point.
Thank you. And I'm grateful for her for doing that, because at the end of the day, if she doesn't do the work and if I don't do the work, and she stays in that victim mindset, that mentality, that those emotions that stay stuck there will probably get passed on to our kids, and our kids are the ones that will end up suffering. If you don't do the work on yourself, you're going to bleed on those who didn't cut you. Let me say that again. If you don't do the work on yourself to fix yourself, you're going to bleed on those people who didn't even cut you. So whether that's your kids, whether that's your spouse, if you're holding on to trauma that you haven't let go of, that you can't figure out how to forgive or forget or move on and work through and release, I promise you it'll manifest itself in certain ways where that, gets passed on from you to the next generation. And this is why racism, this is why hate, this is why so much hurt gets passed on from generation to generations, because we haven't healed that trauma. And this is why I am a huge proponent of breaking that cycle. So what do I need to do? I had to leave my religion. I had to heal myself from the inside so that these kinds of, self-hate, failure-like mentality doesn't get passed on to my kids.
So what time do you have to go?
Oh, what time is it?
1:22.
Okay, we got 20 minutes.
Okay, so let's jump to that.
Yeah.
So how did you go from getting a coach, healing with your ex-wife, but also getting divorced, to leaving the church? Tell us how that happened.
Yeah. So the divorce and the leaving the church happened around the same time. So Lynn and I, we worked through, some of the issues. We stayed together. We hid it from people. We wore a mask. We pretended like we were happy, even though we were struggling. Fast forward to, we were living in Eagle Mountain, Utah. My ex-wife, Lynn, was watching your TED Talk. This is around 2013, 2014.
Yeah, that's when I gave it.
Okay. Yep.
On the LGBT Mormon experience, right?
Yes. And she, after seeing that, because she grew up with a lot of gay friends. I didn't. She grew up with a lot of gay friends. After seeing that, she posted on Facebook Sunday morning that she was in support of gay marriage. And she shared your TED Talk on Facebook. We go to church. We come home. The bishop calls me and says, "Hey, I need to stop by your house." And I was like, "Okay." And he shows up at the house and he's like, "Hey, how are you guys doing? Blah, blah, blah." So we were told that you posted something on social media, Lynn, and we need to talk to you about that. And she's like, "Okay." And he's like, "We saw that you posted, that you're in favor of gay marriage. And you shared John Dillon's TED Talk." And she's like, "Yep." And he's like, "Okay, well," he's like, "Is that how you feel?" And she's like, "Yep." And he's like, "Well, we need to take away your temple recommend." And yeah, she was devastated. He's like, "But if you take it down, then we can give your temple recommend back." And she was like, "No, I'm not going to take it down. That's how I truly feel." She's like, "These kids are killing themselves. And the guilt and the shame and the self-hate for being gay and being Mormon is detrimental, and we need to stop this." And
I just have to jump in here. Like, this is a kind of a Leah Remini moment where I could hear Leah saying, "That's crazy." Like in
2014, maybe
14.
Yeah.
This is just 6 or 7 years ago, and it's still happening in 2021. A Mormon bishop can find out that somebody makes a private post on a personal Facebook page, just saying, "Hey, I think same-sex marriage is okay," or "I love LGBT people," or whatever. "Here's a TED Talk I liked."
Yeah.
And number one, it can get reported back to that bishop or church leader within a matter of minutes, if not hours, if not days. And then they can call you into their office or come visit you and literally start kicking off the process of investigating you, disciplining you, punishing you, and threatening you with your membership for something as innocuous as sharing a TED Talk.
Yeah.
Am I exaggerating?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think the reason that she got called out was because, that by this time I had done Fit2Fat2Fit, and Fit2Fat2Fit kind of went viral and people knew who I was. I wrote a book. And so people, we were kind of like a, I guess, public figure, you could say. So, and she was married to me. because her sister shared her post on her Facebook, but no one knew who her sister was. So no one went after her sister. But because someone saw her post, they told the stake presidency. The stake presidency called the bishop, because here's what happened. The bishop said, look, I am under orders from the stake presidency to do this. He's like, I feel this is wrong. I feel like this isn't right.
Harassing you, they mean.
The bishop said, I feel like taking away the temple recommend is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
But he said he was under orders by the stake presidency. I don't remember who the stake president was, but I think Clayton was the guy's last name. And the stake presidency that ordered him, the bishop, to take away the temple recommend. And for everyone that's listening, a temple recommend is your like pass to get into the temple, like because only certain members of the church can go into the temple. And by taking that away meant that she could no longer enter into the temple, and she was deemed unworthy because she posted that post on social media. So she was crying, and he's like, "Are you sure you don't want to take down your Facebook post?" And she's like, "No, this is how I really feel." And so he took away her temple recommend, and she was crying. She was devastated. And even though the bishop knew it was wrong, he did it because the stake presidency told him to do it. That was a pretty pivotal moment for us. We were pretty devastated. I was kind of hurt by it. I didn't feel like that was necessary, but I wanted to support my wife in what she believed. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to go to the temple either, because since you can't go, I was like, I will, stand by your side in this, even though the church is saying otherwise. So, so we still went to church after that. We transferred out of our home ward and went to a Tongan branch, which was so much more receptive. We told them what happened, and they're like, really? That happened to you guys? Like, yeah, we don't care about that. Like, we could care less. Like, do you want to serve the youth? Cool. We want you guys to serve. Like, we don't care about that. So they gave us a calling. We still went to church for a little bit after that. Then we moved to Hawaii. We moved to the big island of Hawaii. We lived in Kona. And that's where my brother, my older brother, he introduced me to you, John. And I was like, okay, I'll start listening to Mormon stories, and was listening. And then you mentioned about the Mormon essays. I was like, what are Mormon essays? So I Googled that, pulled those up. And that's where I started reading these things about the different versions of the first vision. And I was like, okay, this is not what I was taught. This is not what I memorized word for word this first vision on my mission. How is it that his first version of the first vision of him seeing God in Jesus Christ had nothing to do with what I was told, what happened? And there was all these different versions that I'm like, how could I'm trying to think of myself as a human. If I had a remarkable experience.
We're talking about Joseph Smith. For our listeners who have no idea.
The founder
of
the
church. The founder of Mormonism. Allegedly in 1820, he saw God in Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the story we've all been taught.
And they told him that none of the churches were true, and that the true church would be reestablished through him, kind of in a nutshell. And that's the version that we were taught, was that God and Jesus Christ, two separate beings, showed up to him and told him none of the churches were true. And then the first version of the first vision, he didn't even go to ask them which church was true, right? He went to be forgiven of his sins, right? So I was
it was only the Lord. He said when he wrote down in 1832, it was only the Lord that visited him.
Yeah.
Not the Father and the Son.
Yeah.
Because his theology yet hadn't evolved to where he believed God and Jesus were separate.
Yeah.
And so basically what we're saying to our listeners is Joseph Smith's story of the first vision changed over time, got more elaborate.
Yeah.
And none of us were ever taught this. And you learned this in one of the Gospel Topics essays that the church came out with in the 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
And this is the first time in however many years of being Mormon you'd ever heard this.
Yeah, I'd ever heard of it. Yeah, I was 30 plus years old at that time. And I was like, this is so different than what I was taught. Like, what is happening? And then blacks in the priesthood. So here's another thing, is that in the early days of the church, blacks weren't allowed to hold the priesthood, the power of God, until a very convenient time of 1978. And we were taught, this is what I taught people on my mission, that the reason blacks weren't allowed to hold the priesthood was because, one, that's God sometimes held the priesthood from certain groups of people, and that this was a revelation from God, that this is what God wanted, that he didn't want the blacks to have the priesthood for a long period of time. And then he changed his mind in 1978 and said, now blacks can hold the priesthood. And in the essays, it said how that was a mistake, that was never a revelation from God, that was just Brigham Young, he was the prophet after Joseph Smith. He was the one who established that blacks couldn't hold the priesthood. And the church admitted that was wrong. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, here's this prophet of God that speaks to God, supposedly. And God supposedly told him not to give blacks the priesthood, but now the church is admitting God never told him that was just his own prejudice, right? Because everyone was racist back then and had slaves, supposedly. So that's kind of, he was a product of his environment. But that's not the biggest issue I have, is how come every prophet after that speaks to God never got the revelation that was wrong? Because if it was never a revelation, wouldn't the prophets after that know that was never a revelation? Wouldn't they know, like, because they speak to God, that, hey, that Brigham Young guy, he messed up with this, go ahead and reverse this. But then it was reversed in a very convenient time when there was a lot of pressure from society to change in 1978 so that the blacks could hold the priesthood finally. And I was just able to see through this, like, okay, these are men that are making things up. Like, I'm sorry. They're just making things up. They're doing the best they can. But what's different between this religion and every religion where there's these white men who are leaders of the church that claim they speak to God, but they're making mistakes and they're hiding things. And I couldn't figure out why they were hiding these things and why I didn't see this before. And the thing that really kind of forced me to kind of give up hope, I guess you can say, on these men speaking for God and this being the one and true only church, was the policy in 2015. The church came out with a policy saying that kids of gay parents couldn't be baptized until they were 18 years old, and they had to disavow their gay parents' practices at the age of 18, and then they could get baptized. And this was something that was leaked into the press, thanks to John DeLynn. This is something that was leaked. It wasn't like a revelation where the prophet said, hey, this God just spoke to me, and he said that kids of gay parents can't get baptized anymore. And when it was leaked, it was all over the news, like Washington Post, New York Times. This was all over the news. The Mormon church doesn't allow gay kids or kids of gay parents to get baptized in the church. And I was like, this is wrong. But even people that were super, like 100% Mormon were like, this is fake. This isn't real. The church would never do that, right? And then they realized this is real. The church really did come out with this policy saying that kids of gay parents couldn't get baptized. And I was like, okay, this is the perfect, because I had just read the Mormon essays and I started to realize that these men made mistakes. And I was like, this is a mistake. Why can't the church see that this is a mistake? Why would they want to put this in place? This does not feel from God. This does not feel like this is from God. If this was a revelation, I would want to see whoever was the prophet at the time, Thomas S. Monson, maybe to be like, look, I just received a revelation. It's going to be hard for me to say this. This is what God said to me. He said that kids of gay parents can't get baptized anymore. Please don't kill the messenger. This isn't what I want. God told me this is what, like, that's how I would feel a revelation from God should come, if that's really how it happens. Like, instead of like, oh, put this in the manual and don't tell anyone about it. Oh, it got leaked. Shoot. Oh man, what are we going to do now? And then they came out with like a response like 3 weeks later saying that this is a revelation from God, and this is why God wants this to happen, is to protect the kids. And then fast forward 3 years, 2018, they reversed that policy and they're like, never mind, God changed his mind. And for me, it was so clear, like, why can't we question these men? Why are we just blindly following them when we know that they make mistakes? And instead of like denying that, just accept the fact that they make mistakes, and maybe we can listen to our hearts and be like, you know what, this policy is not from God. It's not for me. It's BS. Like, the word of wisdom for me is like, how can we not, like, I work in health and fitness. How do we not know that prescription drugs are bad for us, or that sugar, consumption is bad for us, and energy drinks are bad for us, but we're still stuck on this coffee and tea thing? That came out in like the 1800s. How is there not any other revelation about health that coincides with what science is saying? Like, how can we not get past this? Like, we're still stuck in coffee and tea when there's millions of studies, not millions, but thousands of studies showing how healthy these substances are. And just to make it an obedience thing is like, can't we use a little bit of logic and just see that this isn't what we were taught. This isn't the way we were raised. In the 80s, we didn't question things. We didn't have access to Google. We didn't have access to the internet. But now all these things are coming out. It just was so clear to me that, look, this church it's a good church. They do good things. They, preach good things. They help a lot of people out. And yes, for some people, it provides structure where it makes them feel safe. And maybe it's right for them. Maybe it is. But I think we live in this age now where there's this awakening happening where people feel safe to question things that don't feel right. And we can break this cycle of staying stuck in the same kind of loops and patterns that we have for the past, X amount of years or decades, where we just don't question anything. And we just like, oh, okay, that's coming from the church. Don't drink soda, don't drink, Coca-Cola, all these things that come from the head of the church. It's like, why can't we question those things ever? And so for me, I knew that, look, the 2015 thing, I was like, look, I can't, like, this is all just made up. Like, why would God want kids of gay parents not to get baptized? That makes no sense at all. And that's not the God that even if I, believed in Mormon God, that's not the Mormon God that I believed in at the time, And
it's worse because that policy made same-sex married Mormons, it tagged them as being worse than murderers and rapists, because a Mormon murderer or a Mormon rapist or child abuser, pedophile, does not necessarily warrant an immediate excommunication. When the church came out with that exclusion policy in November 2015, they declared that same-sex marriage was immediate grounds for a disciplinary council and excommunication, which made just a couple that wanted to make long-term committed same-sex love a high priority. It flagged them as worse than murderers and pedophiles within the Mormon church, in addition to the exclusion of their children. And that was just outrageous.
And that's like, I wasn't okay with that. And I knew that was wrong. And I think people in their heart of hearts, whether they were Mormon or not, felt that was wrong. They felt like initially, but they're like, oh, I trust that the church wouldn't do anything to harm people. But I do feel like in people's hearts, when they first heard that, they're like, yeah, that doesn't feel right. That does not feel good. And so I know that that's how I felt. That's how other people felt. And for me, I'm like, okay, I'm looking at things through a new lens now. But then that's the hard part, is you kind of lose your identity in losing your religion. You're like, who am I without my religion? Who am I without my marriage? And so for me, both those things came tumbling down around the same time: divorce, religion.
What year was this?
2015, 2016.
Okay.
Ish, that's when we got divorced, and that's when I left the church around the same time. And I'm like, well, I'm on this path to discover who I am without this stuff, without being told who I'm supposed to be, without being told what I'm supposed to believe, for the first time. And it can be scary. And you can, harbor a lot of resentment and hate towards this institution that you felt like lied to you, for sure. And I've probably been through those days in the beginning when I first started listening to your podcast, of resentment and like anger of like being lied to. But all the work I've done has gotten me to this place of where I am today, where I'm like, look, I don't hold any anger or resentment, because I feel like, honestly, every person in this world is doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have at that moment in time. And I trust that. Brené Brown talks a lot about that. For me, I can't control what the church does and what they say and what they don't say and what they do and what they don't do. I can't control that. For me, all I can control is my perception of that. And all I can control is my business. And so for me to focus on my business, that's where you can find true happiness. When you try and control an organization, when you try and control a country, a political party, when you try and control your friend, your mom, your dad, and you can't control it, you realize you can't control it, that's where you suffer in life, is when you try and control other people's business or God's business. Like, I can't control the weather. I can't control natural disasters. I can't control all these things. And when you try and live in this world of trying to control that, like on social media, like trying to tear people down and attack people who believe differently than you live in this world of misery, in my opinion. And for me to let go of that was the most freeing thing in the world. And now, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. And that is scary. But our ego wants us to believe that we know, right? That makes us feel safe. Like, hey, we know what's going to happen after this life. We know where we were before this life. And that, for me, is ego-driven, and I recommend the book Ego is the Enemy from Ryan Holiday. Is a great book to listen to learn how your ego makes you suffer in certain situations where you want to know the truth. You want we want to know everything, but to not know is scary for some people because they lose that part of their ego and that sense of self in a way where it's scary to say, I don't know,
So we've got like 5 minutes before you have to go.
Shoot. I know. I'm trying to make this short.
No. You've been great. And I think it's important to take time to tell these stories.
Yeah.
I would spend an hour with you on how hard it is to leave the church and then how hard it is to build up a life again.
Yeah.
And then I want to spend an hour on you building your business, your brand, your identity, and everything you've learned about fitness.
Okay.
So I don't quite know what to do because, you got to go. And I'm just grateful for the time.
Sure.
So why don't you tell us just quickly about your business and what you stand for,
sure,
and what you've done and what it means and whatever time's remaining.
Okay.
Because I would, if this is the only time we end up having with you, I would probably hate myself most if we didn't give you a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'll talk to you afterwards, see if we can make another follow-up interview happen. But basically, with Fit2Fat2Fit and what I do now is I'm on a mission to bring more empathy to the fitness industry. I think every single human in this world wants to be understood, right? And when it comes to health and fitness and people's weight, the fitness industry is a very judgmental place where people are judged off of body image and, what they look like, their outward appearance. And for me, I'm trying to bring more awareness of letting people know that transformation, whether it's physical transformation or you want to lose weight, is way more mental and emotional than we think. And the emotional connection to food is way more powerful than we think. And I think, people, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if you're a trainer, a coach, a leader, or you're a doctor, if people don't feel like they're truly cared about by you, they're probably not going to be willing to listen to what you have to say.
Yeah.
No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And so for me, having done Fit2Fat2Fit twice now, where I intentionally gained weight.
So you tell us how much you were and then what you gained.
Yeah, so I was 193 and I got up to 269.
Whoa.
Yeah, my first time.
On purpose?
On purpose.
Not on accident?
No, this was on purpose.
Okay.
And I did this back in 2011, documented the whole journey. And then I did it again just recently.
So 70 pounds?
75 pounds the first time. And then I did it just recently as a 40-year-old. So I was 31 when I first did it. Did it again as a 40-year-old to kind of show people again.
70 again?
62.
And can we just say it's super unhealthy? Would you agree to be gaining weight intentionally and to be trying to lose weight that fast intentionally? I don't think you're doing that as a model for how people should behave.
But what I wanted to do when I did it the first time, I was truly humbled. And I learned how wrong I was and how...
It was developing empathy for people that...
100%. I developed so much empathy because I used to be judgmental. Like, why can't people just stop eating junk food? Like, dude.
And there's genetic profile and there's life context and emotional profile.
Yes.
That makes it, and there's just metabolism, right? Which makes it so not everyone literally, even if everybody did exactly what you did, ate exactly what you ate, exercised exactly like you exercised. Margie kind of coached me on this a little bit beforehand. They may not be able to physically gain or lose the weight like you did. Is that fair to say?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
And that's the thing is like, it's learning how to love yourself, your body, where it's at now, even though it might not be perfect, while you try and work on this better version of yourself. But the problem is our perception of success in health and fitness is so fixated on getting skinny, getting the body. Once I have this body, then I'll be loved. Then people will love me. Then I'll respect myself. And it's like one day when this happens. I'm trying to bring more awareness to the fitness industry of when you see someone that's overweight, it's so easy to judge them and be like, look, why do you eat so much food? It's very similar to going up to a drug addict and be like, dude, just stop doing drugs and then your life will be better. It's like,
stop it.
Yeah, it's like, just don't do it. It's like, of course, but the emotional connection that we have to food is very similar to drugs where some people use food as an escape. Some people use it to numb their emotional pain that they feel in life. And all I'm trying to say is, if we can learn to be more empathetic towards those people, they will feel more understood, and then they'll probably be more willing to listen to people that aren't shaming them for their weight or make them feel less than. They're going to be more willing to maybe make some positive changes. Whether they get skinnier or not is irrelevant. None of that matters. It really doesn't, because that would mean that everyone that's skinny and fit is happy. But I know
and
a lot of,
and healthy.
I know a lot of miserable people that are skinny, 5% body fat.
Or you can be unhealthy too.
Yes.
You can be miserable and skinny and fit, or you can be skinny and unhealthy.
Yeah.
True?
Yes, very true. So don't look at getting this body as, okay, then I'll be happy once this happens.
Or healthy.
Exactly. Or healthy. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to disrupt the fitness industry is by bringing more empathy. And even with this episode, yes, I would love empathy from other people going after leaving the church. People that stay in the church, they want empathy too for staying in the church. Let's have more empathy for other people instead of causing more division and causing more hate and more anger towards people that you don't even know. And if you knew them, you probably wouldn't hate them. That's all I'm trying to say. So, for now, let's push pause. I'll see what I can do to make it happen to come back on.
Yeah. And I know you got to run. I just want to say, it seems like, just to tie this back to Mormonism, it seems like the approach you're taking to fitness is the antithesis or the opposite of the approach that the church took to you regarding porn and masturbation and even infidelity.
Yes.
It's the opposite of a shame-based, negative, sin deficit approach. Am I just making that up?
No, that's a great observation. That's what I'm trying to do. And all of this ties into what I do with Fit2Fat2Fit. Leaving the Mormon church, going through what I went through, my infidelity, my porn addiction, all of those lessons that I've learned tie into how I coach people in health and fitness now, because all of that is tied together. When you go on a physical weight loss journey, it's not just physical. It's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual. Same thing with a spiritual journey. When you go through a spiritual transition in life, it is tied to other areas of your life. And if you can realize that and realize that they're all tied together, it's going to make that journey so much more fulfilling and so much more long lasting if you see the parallels between the physical, the mental, emotional, and the spiritual. So all of these stories that I've told before this tie into how I help people through, a healthier transition, whether it's with weight loss or if it's a mindset shift that people need. So
really quickly, what is it you offer? What's your website? Do you offer services? Do you have a channel? Do you have a platform? Do you have a podcast? What are the ways, YouTube, whatever, what are the ways people can learn about you, your book?
Yeah.
Just plug it all. Not cool. We don't do sponsorships. I'm not even about promoting products per se, but if you have good to share in the world, how do people consume it?
And that shirt too.
What's that?
Do you sell that?
Oh, merch, right?
I don't actually. I've had a lot of people ask about it. But just go to Fit2Fat2Fit.com. Fit2Fat2Fit.com, and then Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on TikTok.
They can follow you on all those.
They can follow
platforms?
me at Fit2Fat2Fit, and then from there, if you want to purchase something cool.
So there's a book.
There's two books. Fit2Fat2Fit and Complete Keto is one of my books. And then, I have online programs that people can join and be part of my private Facebook group and get access to me and my coaches. And I have a certification course that teaches trainers about empathy and how to use empathy as a fitness trainer, because that's what I'm trying to do is change the direction of the fitness industry. So,
and you coach people for fitness?
Not one-on-one. I don't coach people one-on-one.
Okay.
I have coaches that help me.
Okay.
But we do group coaching sometimes.
Okay.
So we'll have to talk about some other things. We didn't talk about ayahuasca. We'll have to talk about that.
Oh shoot.
We'll come back on.
It'll just be like Mark's story where
we'll see if there's a demand. Do you guys want Drew to come back on? 50%?
No, of course. It's
really
right now. It's a yes. It's a yes. Yeah. Give your final life philosophy just so people can know kind of.
Here's the thing. I've lived a life of self-hate and I saw where that got me. And my hope is to teach people how to learn how to love themselves despite their past, despite their mistakes, despite their weaknesses. If you can operate out of a place of self-love, you can learn to love other people so much more. This world would be such a better place to live if everyone truly loved themselves. And so learning how to love yourself and letting yourself know that you're worthy of that love is probably the most transformational thing that's ever going to happen. So if you struggled with weight loss, if you struggled with porn addiction, you struggled with sin, you struggled with all kinds of things, if you can learn to operate out of a place of self-love versus self-hate, this life will be so much more fulfilling for you. And, it takes time, just like transformation does and weight loss does. But I promise you, if you can learn to develop that self-love, this life will be a much better place for you and the next generation. Like if you want this world to be a better place for your kids, you better learn how to love yourself now and have empathy for yourself. Because I promise you, if you don't, if you hold on to that hate, that resentment towards your parents, towards the church, towards other people, that kind of hate will get passed on and manifest itself in different forms that you aren't aware of yet. And it will get passed on from generation to generation. And that's kind of what my hope is to help people break that cycle.
Beautiful.
Boom.
Well, Drew,
it's end there.
It is what's that?
We'll just end there, I guess.
Drew, thank you so much for sharing.
John.
Thanks for your story.
Yeah.
Thanks for being vulnerable. Thanks for coming on. And thanks for all you've done to help make the world a healthier and happier place. I'm inspired.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, sorry I have to go. I have an acupuncture appointment.
No, it's okay. And Kara, thanks for joining us today.
I could just keep
fun to have you.
reading mean comments and poke you with those. Just kidding. There was none. Everyone
no
was really
mean?
everyone was
dang
really
it.
supportive and felt
I
a
was
lot
hoping
of.
for at least 10.
Nope.
Okay.
You'll be disappointed. Everyone was really, really connecting to your story in the comments as well. So, and so did I.
And Kara, thanks for helping. It's great to have you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hope to have you back. And and thanks to Dre Nord for recommending this. Shout out to Dre and Heather Gay, and love you guys. And just thanks to all our supporters that make Mormon Stories possible. Please go to mormonstories.org and donate. If you don't yet, become a monthly donor to keep this alive. That would be great. Mm-hmm. Share this everywhere on the social media. Stay in touch. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. We appreciate the support. Be good to each other. Love each other. Stay tuned for more episodes of Mormon Stories podcast in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thanks, everybody. Love you guys. Take care.